All of the board members except for Dr. Coles are here, and I hope we'll get him soon. So let's go ahead with the public comments.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning, Ms. Pace, Rose Pace.
All right, we do have two public comments. So before we get started, I'll briefly read the required announcement. This meeting is being conducted virtually in compliance with City of Richmond Ordinance number 2020-093. The public notice, meeting agenda, and agenda attachments for this April 20th, 2021 standing meeting of the boards of GRTC, RideFinders, and Old Dominion Transit Management Company were posted on April 16th, 2021 at ridegrtc.com. Per the meeting notice, all written comments received via email by Carrie Rose Pace prior to 5 p.m. on the day preceding a meeting were provided to all members of the board the night before the meeting and are read during the public comment portion of the meeting by staff following the 2-minute speaking limit and will be included in the minutes of the meeting. Also, per the meeting notice, this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. This meeting, I received 2 submitted comments, one in writing to be read and one with audio to play. I'll read the one in writing first. From Beth and Matt Fuchs, 1416 Grove Avenue. Dear GRTC Board, my name is Beth Fuchs and my husband, children, and I reside at 1416 Grove Avenue. We are writing to thank you for the time and effort you dedicate to our community by serving on this important board. We know several of you personally and appreciate all of your contributions to improve the lives of Richmonders. We are also writing to respectfully request that you reevaluate the efficacy of Bus Route 77. While we make this request on behalf of our own family, many residents who also live along the residential corridor of the Grove Avenue bus line are upset that it was reinstated without community input involvement. Others have concerns about the fact that there is extremely limited ridership and an unclear, undocumented need. Many have noted, as I would like to highlight, the fact that Grove Avenue bears the bus route burden exclusively for both the east and westbound routes. This creates a high frequency of passes for one avenue, which translates into traffic, noise, pollution, and increased danger to bikers and pedestrians, etc. These are major concerns for a residential area with many families, young children, and elderly residents. We have witnessed and have been part of some near misses ourselves. While the FAN is part of a thriving city and public transportation is essential to that success, taxpayers and residents can agree that a demonstrated need should exist prior to the implementation of a high-frequency bus route. That logic aside, and assuming less residential routes are not a viable option for some reason, Broad, Cary, Main, or other commercial corridors, a logical compromise would be to share the route with other avenues, perhaps an eastbound bus on Grove and a westbound bus on Hanover, or vice versa, which would mitigate the burden frequency of passes on Grove. As this bus route seems to have literally landed on our doorsteps without an opportunity for the impacted community to vet these above options or even notice to our active neighborhood association, the FDA, many residents have contacted you directly to voice their concerns. One such letter written last fall outlines the history and details other issues regarding the route. It is attached for your convenience. This has previously, by the way, been included in board public comment. However, several stock letters in support of the bus have come from those who do not live on Grove or even within the city limits. While many Grove residents, like our family, also support public transportation, this outside effort is distorting the viewpoint and reasonable concerns of those most directly affected on a daily, hourly basis by this particular route. We believe there is a way to achieve an effective solution compromise that can address both the public transportation needs of our community while also attending to the concerns of residents, making the route more efficient and effective while limiting the negative impact to residents. Thank you for all you do to oversee this important aspect of our community. We look forward to your thoughtful consideration of how we can partner together to make our community stronger. Regards, Beth and Matt Fuchs, 1416 Grove Avenue. Now we have another public comment, and if you'll bear with me, I do need to share both my screen and my audio.
Good morning. My name is Faith Walker. I am a resident of Henrico County, and I am the Director of Community Engagement with RVA Rapid Transit. RVA Rapid Transit is a nonprofit dedicated to educating and advocating for frequent, far-reaching public transportation in our region. And we first wanted to thank you all for the hard work and dedication of everyone at GRTC during the pandemic. These are hard times, and you all have been providing an essential service day in and day out. On behalf of RVA Rapid Transit, I would like to take the time to express strong support for GRTs to continue zero fare policy for at least another fiscal year through June 30th, 2022. We support this continuation of zero fare for two reasons. First, it would afford critical continued financial relief for core bus riders who have been hit incredibly hard by the pandemic. Second, it would give our region a key opportunity to pilot and examine the benefits, cost, and long-term prospects of zero fare policy in non-pandemic times. Through potential state support from the Department of Rail and Public Transportation for just a project to new federal stimulus support, we believe this is a unique key time to press forward with this pilot. I would like to share a comment collected from our Riders' Voice campaign. During the pandemic, I lost access to the car I had been driving, and my work stopped paying for my bus pass. So it's been great to still be able to use the bus to get groceries, make it to doctor's appointments, and access parks outside of my neighborhood so I can get some fresh air and exercise. This comes from Wyatt. We appreciate your consideration on this front, and we are happy to help in whatever way we can. Grace and peace, and thanks again.
Mr. Chair, this concludes the public comment.
Mr. Chairman, you are muted.
As I said, thank you very much, Ms. Rose Pace, for your continued efforts in all aspects of this operation. I neglected to say that this is not only the Board of Directors of GRTC, this is also the Board of Directors of the Old Dominion Transit Management Company and RideFinders, and the meetings of these three entities are being held concurrently, and I'm praying that someone will clear this up before too much longer. Thank you very much. So now we're going to move to the minutes. I'd like to check out the minutes for the concurrent board meeting. That's the thing I just described on March 16th. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? I have a motion to approve them, please.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed? None opposed. They're approved. The minutes of our special meeting on March 22nd. Any additions or corrections to those? Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Hello, second.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve these minutes. All in favor, say aye.
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 Right, thank you. Now we have a report on development and engagement from Adrian Torres, the Chief Development Officer of GRTC.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. All right, I have my first presentation for this topic is an update on the Regional Public Transportation Plan. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, so I just want to provide you guys an update of what we've kind of done through this process since the last board meeting. It goes through kind of a list of proposed priorities that we'd like to consider in the draft plan, and then a look at the timeline, what we've accomplished so far, and what we have left in kind of our constrained timeline by the end of the fiscal year. So since the last board meeting, we kicked off with a second of core design that was held March 15th through March 16th. In that, we went through the concepts of ridership versus coverage and came up with a recommended expansion network. And this was working with the MPO and the various jurisdictions that had been involved in the original core design and are part of the public transportation working group through the MPO. We held a special board meeting that was held on March 22nd. In that, we did look at, again, the ridership versus coverage, and this was discussing the expansion network, and came up with kind of a expansion priority, which was the 85 ridership and 15 coverage in that meeting. After that, we had a TPO transportation working group, and the intent of that meeting was to look at the expansion priorities and come up with kind of a list of a future implementation once the dollars and resources were available in future years. And since that time, we've had individual jurisdictional meetings, and kind of the goal of the conversations we've had with that is to go through the priority, and priority one being maintaining existing service levels, as well as discussing expansion priorities for the future. So as far as priority one, maintaining our existing service, we really saw during the pandemic how essential GRTC's network is and services that we offer. We have been saying through this process and just about our services in general that we truly are a regional system already. We cross jurisdictions, people use express routes, not just in this region, but from Petersburg as well. So we really are an essential service that just needs to be maintained. So with that, our priority one is just to maintain existing service. And looking at projections for our budget for FY22, we are projecting a need of spending about $20 million to spend of the CVTA dollars towards maintaining just the baseline service as we have today. And just looking at resources and our need, we are looking at most likely continuing the reduced service schedule that we already have in place, at least through some of FY22. All right, and then looking at priority two, this is doing a study, kind of a micro mobility review. So we'll be exploring services that would complement our fixed route system. We know that there's certain areas that just wouldn't support kind of the fixed route model because of density or demand in various jurisdictions, especially some of the more rural ones. So looking at something that's more of a first mile, last mile that will tie in with our current network. What that exactly is, we want to study to help us identify that, and then also work with the jurisdictions and see if there's any interest in what is determined as far as supported in their jurisdictions. And we've identified a need of about $200,000 to spend in FY22 to just do the study. And whatever is laid out, we would again work with jurisdictions and identify priorities within that within the coming years. And then priority two is capital projects. We have recommended to provide 1% of local match for a lot of our grants, for our state DRPT grants, and then reserve other dollars for large capital projects, which this is just an example of some of the larger ones that we already have out there. So fleet replacement and expansion, neighborhood transfer centers, such as 23rd and Franklin, Southside Plaza, Willalon, Chamberlain and Wilmer, and the Downtown Transit Center. And then priority four is to begin to prioritize expansion. So continuing to go through the full list with the core design group. And then we know that expansion is going to be limited based on operators, vehicles. I mentioned that we're still in a reduced service due to COVID. That was something we were hoping would be over by now, but the reality is it's not over. And then using the CVTA funds. So we are projecting minimal expansion, if any, in FY22, but we'll be working with jurisdictions to continue to prioritize the expansion needs that have been identified. What we have certified between expansion and micromobility based on kind of the surplus on top of the maintenance of service is about $6 to $7 million of the FY22 dollars. And just to give a highlight of what was kind of prioritized from the core design as well as from the board meeting, from the expansion priority list. And I'm going to not read through these because I have actually the images to go through. I'm going to go through them pretty fast. But the Route 1C, expanding that up to Brook and Parham, doing a loop on the 21-9 Express out to Innsbruck, extending Route 3 over to Azalea, that's the one on the north side, creating 7 15-minute frequency up to Laburnum on 9 Mile, Route 5 increasing to 10 minutes, changing Route 77 from today it goes on Grove in the Fan and Museum area. We're changing this to go on Main and Cary, and then it would continue to U of R on its current regular route, but it would become part of the Route 5. Let's see. Next one is extending the Route 1A out to Chesterfield Town Center, combining what is now the Route 111 to the 3B. And this provides kind of a one-seat ride from down the John Tyler area on Route 1. And you could go all the way to downtown or even go all the way up to Henrico without having to transfer. The 3 routes identified for expansion in Chesterfield, the 84, 85, and 86. One goes to the Government Center, that's the 85, and one goes to Wilkinson Terrace. This shows kind of a combination of our Route 18 and 79. The 18 currently goes to Staples Mill, to Amtrak Station, hits the Government Center, and then the 79 goes out to Gaten's Crossing today. A combination and increasing the frequency to 30 minutes provides better access to several hospitals out in Henrico, as well as better access to the Amtrak station. That is the full list. Like I said, we'll be working through kind of the priorities of that list and what is available as far as resources with operators, vehicles, as well as dollars. And looking at timelines, this is what we've gone through so far. So we kind of kicked off in January, gone through an outreach phase, now are working on drafting the draft report. And as far as next steps, we're currently at the board right to today. So we still have several boards to go through. We're proposing to go through the CBTA TAC, the MPO TAC, as well as give an update to the CBTA Finance Committee. And then after that, we'll do a final report. And then hitting the policy board, again, doing updates to CBTA TAC, MPO TAC, again, the Finance Committee, coming back to the board and going to the full authority at the end of June. So many meetings to cover and getting a lot more information. Originally, this was planned to go to the full authority in May. However, after working through the working groups, meeting with the board, we decided to do a little bit more outreach. So that is why we kind of added on an extended month to do more coordination with the jurisdictions and get some more input. Any questions?
Adrian, I have a couple of questions. Can you go back to step 2, step B, whatever that is? I can't. All right, 2. So micro-mobility, exploring that. This is simply a study that you're doing right now, looking at, right? 200,000. And this is not the same as the required service for handicapped, and that's along with our regular service.
No, so you're referring to the paratransit system that's FTA required within a 3/4 mile of our fixed route system. No, this would be kind of an enhanced service. What that exactly is, we are yet to determine, but exactly like a model partnering with kind of how we have today, UServe or Lyft or Uber might be an example of a partnership with them where they may have the resources, but we manage it kind of a last mile, first mile. It could even be looking at van pools instead of maybe an express route, some sort of smaller vehicle that we may own that also might do some sort of deviated fixed route. Oh, there's options out there. What's exactly is the best fit, depending on what the need is. That's what we want to determine. And
the 2 requirements that makes this regional service is, first, it needs to connect with our fixed route service. That is, be first mile and last mile. And the other
that's what we're looking for as far as
the other is it be both directions, so that someone who is not in that obscure or smaller area can in fact get access to that, not just from that. I just want to be specific about that, because this is, otherwise it's a kind of an interesting check. Go to number 3. Are we suggesting that money from the new money that's coming in from CVTA would be used as match for capital projects?
Yes. So an example is for, let's say, for FY22, the local matches are currently 4%. Of the 4%, we would do 50%. So 2% would come from the CVTA dollars. This allows us just to do more. For example, the vehicles, we had a lot of requests for vehicles this fiscal year for potential expansion, because we got rid of a lot of them with the Richmond Transit Network plan. This would help us to pay for those vehicles without asking the local jurisdictions for additional dollars.
We'd still have to ask them for the 2%.
Correct.
So
yeah,
we're only asking them for half as much. It's the equivalent to the other maintenance of effort thing we did with Enrico and Richmond already, correct?
Similar, yeah, if you could say it that way.
Okay, I didn't know about that. And number 4, how do we? 4 is your list of new routes, right? That's
Yeah.
Yeah. How do we get that prioritized in terms of implementation?
We've already started the conversations with the various jurisdictions to see their kind of requests within them. For example, I'm going to use the Route 1, knowing that the densities in certain areas may not increase until certain points in time. Kind of coming up with implementation plans based on that is one. Another one is we do plan doing a phase 2 outreach. We did the phase 1. We were hoping to do phase 2 now, but knowing we're not going to be doing any expansion right now, we're kind of holding that off. So we do get public input as well.
Did I not hear the expanded route out to Chesterfield Town Center?
Yes, the 1A out to Chesterfield Town
That's
Center.
still there. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so will we have a chance to look at what happens with the prioritization of these, since it's quite clear that the long list that we approved last time at 8515 is not going to happen immediately?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say if that's going to be incorporated in the final plan, but it will be something. We'll probably have the full list in there and work in FY22 for kind of an implementation plan for FY23.
Implementation plans meaning sequencing.
Right.
Right. Okay. All right. Anybody else have any questions on this? I know you're just going through meeting after meeting after meeting where they review everything that the last meeting reviewed, but thank you very much for the work. You're
welcome. And Julie's going to get more into this, but I do want to make more comments that I wanted to make in the beginning, was that our recommendation is to use the FY21 current revenue that's come in from CVTA for kind of that maintenance of service of the 20 million or so for FY22. So we kind of are just always on a year lag, so we know what dollars we have available.
Yeah, unless or until we have a much more secure understanding of how we interface with the new source of revenue and the CVTA's allocation of it. Thank you.
All right. I can go ahead and introduce Stephanie for the update for transit governance.
Welcome, Stephanie.
Hi, good afternoon. Good morning. Sorry. Thank you very much. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. So I'm here to give a brief 5-minute update on the work that we've been doing so far on the projects, that is to evaluate the governance structure for transit service in the Richmond region. We are also tasked with evaluating the establishment of a transportation district. So over this 5-minute period, I'll just briefly go over the study objectives and purpose, the approach we're using, and the current progress and next steps. So with the background of the CVTA, I'm sure many of you are already aware that it was a new legislation that was implemented in 2020. And with that, the jurisdictions that it covered, that's the Planning District 15, there was a new regional tax that was imposed. That's the 7% sales and use tax, as well as the wholesale gas tax. And of this amount, there's a 15% portion that goes to transit. So with this portion provided for transit, the need for this study was really to review the current effectiveness of the policies at GRTC to ensure that there can be proper accountability for those funds that are allocated. So for this project, the purpose is to the main objective is to review the existing structure and make any recommendations for changes for that structure if needed, and also evaluate the creation of a transportation district. How we've gone about this so far is in 4 steps. First, looking at the existing conditions at GRTC. Briefly, just very briefly on the service, but mainly on the governance, since that's the primary mandate for this study, which has a very limited scope. So reviewing the governance structure, identifying strengths and opportunities. Next, looking at a peer study of agencies across the country to identify what the range of possibilities for transit governance could be, and make informed recommendations from that. Then under this task, we're also looking at a benchmarking for CVTA, reviewing that of the Hampton Roads as well as the MVTA. Once we are done with that benchmarking, we move into the final main component, which is the reviewing of the establishment of a transportation district to see what kind of options there may be if it's combined with the existing GRTC structure and or CVTA, looking at what different iterations might be possible. So in addition to this, we've been doing a lot of stakeholder outreach. So far, we've spoken to about 40 representatives from 13 different stakeholder groups, and spoken to some of you board members on this call today as well. Our last interview was with DRPT, where we talked a lot about the study and what got some good recommendations as well. So with all the information that we've collected so far, we are moving forward with finishing up the next tasks in this study. The main group that we are working with is the steering committee at the CVTA. And so they are serving as the liaison to all the representatives shown here on this slide. Currently, we're finishing up phase 1 of this study. We are about 90% complete, I would say, with phase 1. What is remaining is completing or finishing up just a few changes with the GRTC assessment, finishing up the peer study and the CVTA benchmarking. As I just mentioned, we have completed a first round of stakeholder interviews. The next phase will entail the review of the transportation district. And then finally, by the 3rd week of May, we hope to have a main discussion, which is the core of this project, of the governance strategies that we would recommend for GRTC. Of that, I would say some of the work has already begun by looking at evaluating GRTC relative to the peer agencies. So once those tasks are complete, we can have a good discussion of a set of options for review by the steering committee, and definitely with input from all the other stakeholders of the steps to move forward with. We are looking at finishing up a draft report by the final week of a final report by the end of June, but a draft report in early June for review and comment. So this is really just a brief high-level overview of what has been done so far and what is yet to be completed. And I can use the next 5 minutes to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Ben, you're muted again.
Your phase 3 discussion is with whom? You describe that as is that an internal discussion within your staff?
So with phase 3, once we have the recommended potential governance strategies, we will present that to the steering committee that we are working with.
So that's the committee that is a part of the CVTA staff mostly, right? I mean, the different staff of the different jurisdictions.
Exactly. So it has representatives from all the CVTA jurisdictions.
So is that something that the board of GRTC can look at?
Certainly, I believe through the liaison, I would have to discuss with Chet how that would work. But definitely we would want input from GRTC just as much as from all the other jurisdictions.
So Ms. Tim or Adrian, can we make sure that the board can see or hear about that?
Mr. Chairman, as soon as we have access to that information, we will certainly make it available. I am actually very interested in having Bonnie, Ms. Ashley, review the information, as she has a lot of the legal understanding of our corporate structure and the history.
Right.
So definitely believe that her background in this will be very useful. Stephanie, I also, and Mr. Chairman, you may have seen in the news, and you probably saw the letter that I forwarded on, that Enrico is advancing a request to also have us consider onboarding concurrently with this process. So we'll be having some discussions with them at the request of the shareholders to be included in that. And Stephanie, we would like to make sure that any of that is also included in your information, so that we're not, that we're working together with that information and not at odds.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be helpful.
And I'm trying to make sure that the board of GRTC, which in fact is the current governing board, and which has more experience in this than anybody, actually gets to comment on things that are being proposed or discussed, Ms. Jackson. Which means, by the way, that if any of the board members who have not spoken to you would like to, can they contact you?
Certainly.
Okay, and so I guess Julie or Adrian has contact information?
Yes, Adrian would be good.
Okay, so if any of you guys want to say anything on this is your shot. Get Adrian to contact Stephanie for you, and we'll get that before they get through. Any further questions about this?
I think Adrian could probably comment on this, but just for the board members, before you make your comments, wanted to thank Stephanie and the team there for the work they've been doing. They were given a fairly tight time frame with a very limited scope and a low budget, and they have been working a lot of hours to try and get a lot of very diverse people coordinated and their thoughts and desires included in this report. It has been no easy task for them, so thank you for taking the time to come and speak with us. I know this is out of scope for you, and I know that the board very much appreciates, and I appreciate hearing from you directly. We've been watching the reports that you've been doing directly to the CVTA. Well, some of that information is works in progress. We understand that. I was very interested to see that for the board, 2 of the peer agencies that they're reviewing are agencies that I have direct experience working for, both HRT in Hampton Roads and MTA and RTA in Nashville.
Yes, we did get a very, some really good information from the people we spoke with, and they did mention you, so they do miss you very much.
Thank you for that.
Board members, any comments?
I do have
Sorry.
a quick question, Ben.
Yeah.
Stephanie, I think it was a very good presentation. I appreciate it. Can you go into a little bit more detail about what exactly a transportation district is, how that differs from the current MPO? Is it going to be transit focused, or what all are your thoughts about, when you're evaluating a transportation district?
So first, it will be looking at what the legislation in this Commonwealth of Virginia allows. In different parts of the country, the language for transportation districts is sometimes similar to what would be allowed for an authority, what would be called an authority in another area. So in phase 2, what we'll be looking is really delving into what the legislation allows. But mainly it's sort of providing a way for different jurisdictions to collaborate, and whether or not they want to impose maybe a transportation tax of any kind to fund transit in the area, or to provide transit, or to plan for transit. It really just depends on what the state of Virginia's laws allows. For example, in the Hampton Roads, where there's a transportation district, they don't impose a tax for the transportation district of Hampton Roads. They get contributions for HRT from the different jurisdictions there. But in other parts of the country, transportation districts impose a tax, and that's the main purpose for implementing them. So once we get to phase 2, we'll have all the details on what the legislation allows and how that would be beneficial if there are any opportunities for this area. But it would be another entity that could have a board, again, a board of representatives to manage that entity.
So that would be an additional entity, like you said, in addition to CVTA, in addition to the MPO, in addition to GRTC. It's not dissolving any of those current entities.
Yeah, so the MPO is very different, which is purely for planning purposes. So for MPOs, I think they're a separate entity, and it's very different from looking at CVTA or a potential transportation district.
Mr. Milliken, also there's, just to add to that, if I may, Mr. Chairman, is that not only do we have those organizations, we also have the RMTA, the Tolling Authority, establishing a Transportation District Commission in the Central Virginia area. Absolutely would, it has to be done by state legislation. It creates a regional authority or commission. So it's a governmental agency. In Hampton Roads, I don't believe that they don't use that. The Transportation District Commission of Hampton Roads is the regional commission that HRT works and staffs, and that's the operating agency. And the taxation that comes to them either comes directly from their jurisdictions, similar to what we have coming from the local funds from our partners, or they also have a new tax that was implemented recently that goes to their HRTAC, their Transportation Accountability Commission, which is similar to our CBTA, and that money then is also transferred to HRT for regional transportation, similar to what we have here, where the CBTA is collecting money, and that comes to us for the development of a regional transportation support for the system. So we already have a lot of the pieces in place, similar. The question is, what is the value of a district commission in addition to what we already have with already the elected officials overseeing us, both the MPO and the CVTA already having oversight, as well as the Board of Supervisors and City Council for Richmond and Chesterfield.
Thank you.
The question we're dealing with here, though, is actually the governance and structure of how GRTC is run, and whether it's integrated with other agencies or transportation district. Correct? I mean, how's this company going to run in the future? Am I right?
Yes, I believe that's a core of the study.
Yeah. Okay. Further questions? And Stephanie, I just want to thank you, by the way, for your work and for your courtesy over these very difficult weeks already. Other questions or thoughts?
A thought. First, thank you, Dr. Yankson, for the presentation. Well, I guess a question, and I'm breaking a rule as an attorney. You're never supposed to ask a question publicly you don't already know the answer to. But I don't. And is there any precedent for any of these governance structures to have a mix of appointees and elected officials serving, on the same board or in the same governance, structure, appointees from one jurisdiction, elected officials from another? Is there any precedence for something like that? I don't know the answer.
Yes, from our peer study, we've seen that other agencies across the country do have that kind of board structure where it would be a mix of one elected official from each jurisdiction and maybe an additional citizen member, but it has to be equal from each area.
So all
There are other boards. Sorry?
All jurisdictions being this.
Yeah, so if there are 4 jurisdictions, 4 of them would have elected officials as well as citizen appointees. It could vary in the number of people, the representation on the board could vary. We've also seen cases where the bylaws of the agency prohibits any elected officials from being on the board as well. So it really just depends on what the bylaws of the agency are or what the legislation created was based on. So there are both cases. No elected officials or a mix of elected officials and appointees.
Thank you, Dr. Yankson.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming to our happy meeting. And we appreciate your work. And look, let me encourage any of you who want to make sure you get what you have said to communicate it with Dr. Yankson and the AECOM folk. All right, thanks. Our next item, Adrian, let's see, or Communities Award to RideFinders for Clean Air Campaign. Ms. Ruffin.
Yes, good morning. Good morning. Someone once said that if you find a job you love, you never work another day in your life. And I have found that to be true in my 17, almost 18 years at RideFinders and GRTC. For those who don't know, I'm Sharika Ruffin, Program Manager for RideFinders, and I want to thank the board and Julie and Vaughn for giving me the opportunity to speak briefly this morning about the Communitas Awards, which is an international recognition program that recognizes exceptional entities whose programs and services benefit their communities, especially if their business model has changed to do so. And we're honored to share that RideFinders is the recipient of the 2021 Communitas Leadership Award in the Community Service and Corporate Social Responsibility category for the Celebrate Earth Day Every Day Clean Air campaign. This was a campaign that just didn't focus on clean air, but included other activities such as sustainability initiatives, education, awareness, and executing green actions such as recycling that had a positive impact on the environment that could be implemented individually or on a corporate level. And during the course of the campaign, we used RideFinder staff in much of our social media activity to increase engagement, but to also show that we don't just talk the talk, but we also walk the walk. So we were very happy with that. And even one part of our campaign resulted in a monetary donation to Feed More on our behalf from our software developer. So we're very excited about this, and we're just thankful that you gave us the opportunity to talk about it this morning.
Well, it's great to see you. Thank you for your work, and you guys, as I think, as all of us are board members of RideFinders, and I'm personally very grateful for what you do, and proud of the quality of this work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Service changes, Mr. Ross, for June. You're on mute.
Good morning. Try that again.
Morning.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. So I'll be talking about our June service changes. Originally, we had actually planned to have these changes go in effect May 22nd. We've actually pushed the January booking out by a month, so we will now be having these June changes go into effect on June 20th. And that extra month actually gave us the time to accommodate some of the changes that were brought about by our recent union contract. So some of those, just as an example, include that all routes must have at least one early straight with weekends off. Our split duties are capped now at 10.5 hours. Previously, they were capped at 11.5. Our operators must have 10 hours off in between duties rather than 8 in our previous contract. And we are also every shift accommodating a 20-minute meal break. And previously we were using a 10-minute meal break. So just gave us an additional month to be able to accommodate these changes in our service scheduling. To kind of run through what will be included in this booking, we are going to continue to operate our reduced COVID schedules. So what is happening on the street now as far as how we're treating COVID. So the Route 28 Express and 29 will continue to be temporarily discontinued. The routes 23, 26, and 27 will continue to be operated by our SpecTran department with reduced service schedules, just as they are now. So each of those routes operate about half as many trips as we were running pre-COVID. We'll continue to do so in this booking. I'll kind of rattle off these routes, but then I'll go back and give you a little more detail about them. So the Route 4A, 4B, the 29 Express, the 50, the 64 Express, the 82 Express, the 76 and 77, these will all continue to operate by our fixed route service with our reduced service schedules. So a little more detail about those. The 4A and 4B will operate with a reduced service schedule of 60-minute frequency. So previously they were operating at a 30-minute frequency. The 29, 64, and 82 all are expressors, and they will continue to operate with our reduced service schedule, which again is about half as many trips as we were operating pre-COVID. And that's of course due to decrease in commuter traffic. The 50, 76, and 77, they will all operate with the 40-minute frequency. And prior to COVID, we were operating at about a 30-minute frequency.
So the 4A and 4B, is that each of those is an hour, so they end up being a half-hour service to Fulton and back?
I'm sorry, they were both originally operating with a 60-minute frequency, and we will now, I'm sorry, they were originally operating with a 30-minute frequency, and we're knocking that back to a 60-minute frequency.
Which means that one of them will go every 30 minutes. Is that correct? Are they offset like that? They both go to Fulton.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Our only routing change for this booking is actually the extension of the Route 111. So currently we are running Route 111 from the Food Lion at the Jeff Davis Richmond Highway, right on the border of Richmond and Chesterfield, and that extends down to John Tyler Community College. And with this extension, we're actually going to extend the route about a mile further south in Chesterfield County to service the Greenlee mobile home community. So based on this, like I said, it's only about a mile difference. So this is a minor service change, and it's actually kind of resource neutral. There's no additional operators needed and no additional vehicles needed. So
does the 111 still go into John Tyler physically?
Yes, it will. Yes.
Okay.
So as you can see the map on the left, the top is Food Lion. And you can see this little loop in the bottom is John Tyler Community College. And we will continue to keep servicing through John Tyler Community College, but we will also extend south to Greenlee Mobile Home Community. So you can see this is kind of, it is a large community, so we're excited to be providing service there. So next steps, we will continue to refine our schedules to address some on-time performance. concerns, and I'll talk more about those later in a presentation later. We will do our normal outreach process for the one additional stop that we'll need to make this extension possible. And that stop is actually, like I showed you in the Greenlee, the turnaround is at Greenlee, at the Greenlee community. We are working with Chesterfield County to make sure that the infrastructure there accommodates our vehicles. So they have been great in helping us to design something that can accommodate our vehicles to turn around there and service the stop. And again, this is a minor change because it is about a mile. So there's no board action required. I'm really just presenting this information for informational purposes for you only. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? It's, you know, these little things, but that's a great, a wonderful increase there on the 111. So we can really serve some people who really do need it. All right. Thank you very much for your work and for your report.
Thank you.
Adrian, we're on again here. Temporary downtown transfer site design.
Hello again. Share my screen. Oops. Can you guys see the Word document?
There it is.
Okay, great. All right, so this is an action item. A little bit of background on this. GRTC, we currently occupy the sidewalk area adjacent to the public safety building downtown on 9th Street between Marshall and Lee. That building has been recently sold, and I know they're currently going through maybe some hazmat review, and they are anticipating demo potentially as early as September. So we could see something happening within the next 6 months in that site. So this will have, of course, a major impact on our operations. We have several routes that go down there during the day, and then the majority of our routes do use the transfer facility in the evenings and on the weekends. So we are asking for design services for site layout, full 100% design, procurement and construction support for a new relocated site. So we've been coordinating with the city and have identified a new location, which is right across the street of where we currently occupy, and this is the parking lot at 8th and Clay, so in between 8th and 9th and Lee and Clay Street. We have some design preferences. What I have here as an image, the city did do a conceptual kind of feasibility study to determine if we could even operate in the footprint that they would allow us to. So what you see in the image is keeping parking for the court services, and then the majority of the site would be used for transfer operations. Ideally, we'd like to have 12 bays. We would like a sawtooth design, operator restrooms, amenities, meaning benches, trash cans, shelters, lighting for the buses themselves, as well as kind of pedestrian level lighting, supervisor parking, communication signage, wayfinding signage, and then pedestrian accessibility and ADA. So the model here, I mean, this is just a concept to make sure it should fit, but something along these lines as far as use of the parking lot site. Some highlights, so we use the GRPT on-call contract for general transit planning, and we reached out to 2 consultants. We received a proposal back from Kimberly Horn, and after reviewing the proposal, we determined that they were responsive and satisfied the scope with their approach. The total expenditures for these services is estimated to not exceed $225,000, and this is at 80% federal, 16% state, and 4% local. The federal funding source that we will be utilizing is from a fund that we had gotten for a downtown transfer site. We've had it in our possession since, I think, 2007-8. The total funds available within that funding source is 2.1 from federal, so altogether it's about 2.7 million. So we plan to use that for subsequent phases as well. So what I am recommending is that the Board of Directors authorize the CEO to contract with Kimberly Horn for professional services for site layout, design, procurement, and construction support for a temporary transfer site at 8th and Clay to not exceed $225,500. And if you have any questions.
Okay. So we basically have to use the whole block except for that little cutoff there for parking for the courts, right? To the east.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty
So
much the whole parcel.
yeah, we're using about 3/4 of the block. Okay. Any questions?
Is
I
this
know
still
that
be a temporary situation? This is not a permanent by any means.
This is designed to be temporary, correct? Not permanent. We are having other efforts working with the city and still working with their ad hoc kind of permanent transfer center group to move towards the permanent site, hopefully in the near future. Dual efforts.
Does this not qualify to be a permanent site in some capacity?
As
I know it's
not,
still
I guess, in the full plan. I don't have any background as far as where we will end up. That's what we're working on now. I mean, it has potential, but I'm not sure.
If I may jump in, Mr. Chairman, the conversations with the city have been there. They have several parcels that are potential. There's also the conversation about whether or not a permanent transfer center should be in a parcel such as this, or should go back to being at an on-street linear. Those conversations are still ongoing. The problem is that there wasn't sufficient time to get us to define a site and construct a site that would be permanent prior to our need to leave our temporary transfer plaza. It would be up to the city if they wanted to designate this property as a permanent or use it for a different use, but we're still working through the process. So it could be, but at this point, there's no indication from the city that they would want this to be the permanent.
you said that Adrian, that is the dense use of this primarily weekends and evenings? Does the use vary as to time of day and day?
Yes, primarily the way our service is set up is that it kind of gets utilized highly after 7 on weekends and Saturday, and then it's all day on Sunday.
So when you're talking 12 bays in a sawtooth fashion, the bays are fully utilized at those times you discussed.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Further questions?
Yeah, I am. The word temporary is sort of interesting. It's sort of interesting here. I mean, to move from one temporary facility that we were at for, I would say, at least 4 years, maybe longer, and to another temporary, it's just, we're really kicking the ball down the road. And I know we've had, actually it's got to be more than 4 years, because this goes back to Mayor Jones' administration. So
April 2014.
Okay. So that would be 7 years almost to the date that we were at another temporary spot. I think it's at some point, and there's so much going on, but at some point we really got to ask the city, and now with a mayor and a second term and all that, someone's got to eat or get out of the restaurant. I wanted to use another expression, but I caught myself. And because, again, I feel like temporary is because of lack of commitment. There's just this lack of commitment from the city because they're always looking for a better offer. It sounds like a bad dating scenario. And, at some point we've got to get to, a commitment to some space, because again, this is using resources on something that's deemed as temporary, and then someone comes along with an offer for a apartment building or something like that, and here we are, right back to doing the same thing. So I'm just soapboxing right now because just a little frustrated about having to keep kicking the can down the road. But you know, but it's feasible. It looks, you know, it seems like we'll be better off than we have been. So we'll just keep on with the forever engagement, but doesn't look like we're getting married anytime soon.
Adrian, did you hear anything from John Marshall Court Building about that?
I have not heard anything from John Marshall Courts Building, and I haven't heard anything from the city either.
When we first started that, we had some kickback from them, and that's why we tried to get that lot as a permanent transfer center, to put a permanent transfer center there. And we got a lot of kickbacks from the John Marshall Court over there, and and I think it's been longer than 7 years.
They get that little parking lot now, you know, so maybe they'll reconfigure it to serve their purposes. But I can't, you know, with people having to come in and all the other stuff, I can't imagine that that's going to make a lot of folks happy. But hey, you know, again, it's temporary.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Braxton, perhaps we can have a conversation offline about whether some attempt to move stuff a little bit politically in the city by the board members from the city would be helpful.
I think that'd be good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Adrian, do you know if any of the amenities that are being thought of are going to include shelters or anything to help protect people from the weather? Or is that something that we don't do with the temporary?
Yes, we definitely will have shelters. The dark blue and those light blue ones are shelters, so they would fit in the footprint. We originally were planning on bringing the ones we already have, which is 6, but we'll most likely upgrade them to be the new design and bring more than the 6 that we have today.
Great, thank you.
All right, this is certainly an interesting history, and thank you very much for your work. We need to approve this expenditure. What is it, to AECom?
No, this is Kimberly Horn.
To Kimberly Horn
Kimberly
Horn for the design, right?
Correct.
All right, and that's up to 205 with the contingency. Could I have a motion to approve this expenditure? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It's passed. Thank you very much.
One abstention. One abstention.
Okay, one abstention. Thank you, George. All right, so go ahead.
I meant to intro our new capital improvement program manager. So I'm going to stop sharing and let him share himself. But as of yesterday, we now have a capital improvement program manager. So I'd like to introduce McGregor Shepard. So I have been kind of leading these capital projects, but he would be the one to kind of do this procurement had he started a little bit earlier. So you'll see him in board meetings in the future. We are very excited to have him and hand over the projects that we already have and plenty more that we have planned and will continue to plan as we expand our regional footprint.
Welcome, Mr. Shepard.
I'm aboard.
And is this a new position or just a new employee?
Yes, this is a new position that will do more planning level as well as work with consultants for coordination with these capital projects.
All right.
Mr. Campbell, this is the position we talked about that would be capitalized because the majority of the work will be advancing the capital programs.
Excellent. Excellent. All right.
And he is now officially 2 days old. So
wonderful. Well, thanks, Mr. Shepard, for coming on board. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you for having me.
Cheryl Adams, Operations and Maintenance Report.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. So our Chief of Transit Operations, Mr. Tim Barron, will go over our operating performance for the month of May. And following Tim will be Tony Carter, our Director of Risk Management, to review our safety performance for the month of May. And then we will have a treat where we will go over the quarterly performance, which will be a group effort between planning and operations. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl, and good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and everyone.
Good morning.
First, I want to start with the KPIs, and for the fixed route OTP, starting on page 28 of the board packet, you'll see that we're still 67% on-time performance, so not really a significant change yet. But during the quarterly performance portion of the report, later on, we talked about on-time performance measures and ways in which we're going to address it. So I'll hold off for that in more detail a little later. For care, on-time performance, still around 93, almost 94%, so steady and doing pretty good as far as care TP goes. I want to spend a few moments talking about the next subject, and that is the lost trips. And tied into that is the absenteeism rate. Lost trips we had for the past month was 1,642, which equates to 97% of our service that we operated. I mean, that is better than February, mainly because of the adverse weather and snow events we had. But we still had some challenges through the month of March, and it's carried over somewhat in April as well. Due primarily to a couple of factors, the absentee rate, as well as our overall manpower and so forth, a shortage of operators. So, for example, we were a little over 15% of our absenteeism rate for the past month, which has gone up. And there's several factors that contributed to that. One is, as we get into the spring of the year, we're a higher number of planned vacations and leaves that operators bidded back last year for this year. We had a couple of COVID positive cases through the month of March. And in doing so, of course, we have to go through contact tracing because it's important that we still maintain safety. So we want to make sure that whenever we have those scenarios, that we are working in conjunction with the health department on addressing that issue and pulling operators from service if need be, so that they can get tested, quarantined, and so forth. Also, we're encouraging our operators and employees company-wide to take the vaccine. And in doing so, unfortunately, some of the folks have had ill effects from the second dose. So that spiked a little bit this month as well, and it's carried over also in April. So when folks have taken that second dose and are not feeling well, they have been allowed to take off to recover from that. And then we also have had to adjust to the rule changes and the new labor agreement. As you are well aware, we ratified, or you all agreed to ratify the labor agreement, which went into effect on February the 16th. And there were some changes to some work rules and so forth, which holds the operators more accountable. And in doing so, that has resulted in taking some progressive actions with certain individuals through retraining, other disciplinary actions such as suspensions, and even up to and including terminations. So we have had to deal with that, and has resulted in some increases in absenteeism from the result of that as well. But we also want to make sure that we work on retention, because it's not just a matter of folks leaving the organization. We want to look at ways in which we can keep them as well, through our education efforts, making sure people are familiar with the new work rules. We posted some of those, and we're also in the process of publishing and the new rule book and the labor agreement, and also refresher training. Tony may mention a little bit, we're continuing with our ongoing training programs to make sure people are up to date on the latest training initiatives we set for. And we're also revamping our line instructor mentoring program to make sure that, especially with our newer operators, that we have them working with senior operators to go through any issues or problems they may have to get over that first year or so of service so that they can make sure they're good, productive employees down the road. Going back now to the FITS report, which starts on page 37 of your board packet. See that we're still down compared to last year with the ridership down a little over 17%. And that's still due to COVID, of course, you know, the effects of that. But what you will notice is that first month in a while, we did have a slight increase, even though it was 0.86% compared to March of last year. As you're aware, last March was when the shutdown occurred. So our ridership dropped dramatically as a result. So you'll see that this month, and hopefully as ridership continues to go up from month to month, as it has been for the last few months, we're starting to see a steady climb. Local service is almost back up to pre-pandemic levels. So we'll continue probably over the next few months to see that ridership slowly go up as things start opening up around the region as well. Recruitment, you know, I mentioned earlier about absenteeism, but we do have to make sure that we offset that by keeping the steady stream of employees coming into the workforce as well. You know, right now we're at 261 full-time, 19 part-time operators, which is about 30 less than what our budgeted number is. So that's really the driving factor behind the challenges we've had, in addition to the absenteeism that I mentioned earlier. We're just short operators, but we're going to continue to work those initiatives that I've mentioned in prior months. We have a class that is just graduated, a class of 5. We have 3 that started back on April the 5th, and we're continuing to do different recruiting efforts. I will mention one new initiative working with the marketing department. And what we're doing is we're starting to reach out to the local colleges, VCU, VUU, Virginia State, and the community colleges to recruit college kids. You know, one thing I want to share some success stories that we have had over the years. You know, Virginia Tech, JMU, you know, and Harrisonburg, which are primarily college towns. What they have done over the years is they use college students to drive some of their routes. And that gives those individuals work experience and so forth. And what we've done over the years is we've actually recruited some of those people to come work for GRTC as supervisors. And they've moved to different positions within the organization, training and so forth as a result. So we want to take that model and kind of use it locally. So we've reached out to the local colleges. We're also going into Facebook jobs, which primarily focuses on college and up and coming college graduates to see if we can recruit and get from that some positive results as well. So what we'll do is as we're recruiting those individuals, they can come in and train during the summer, get their full training under their belt. And then during the fall and spring semester, they can drive part-time on, you know, after classes, on weekends and so forth. And then after they graduate, you know, they may want to continue to work here full-time, you know, either as an operator or move into some supervisory capacity or some other part of the organization, planning, scheduling, or what have you. We've had some success with other colleges doing that, so we can see if we can do that locally here. And we've also developed a 2-year plan from a recruiting, hiring, and training standpoint. I've been working with the other departments, planning and scheduling, safety, risk management, human resources, and so forth, to make sure that we are continuing that stream of employees, because it's important that not only do we build the work back up to where we need it to be, just to maintain the service that we currently have, but as we talked about earlier, the development of the regionalization to make sure that we keep pace once we move forward with those plans. So we want to make sure that that operationally we address that. COVID-19, as I mentioned earlier, we are encouraging employees to take the vaccine. You know, right now we have about 25% of the employees company-wide that have taken at least 1 dose. about 12% that have taken both doses. So those are encouraging signs there. I mentioned earlier that we did have 2 positive cases last month, and we had 1 so far this month. We're now up to 70 total, but we'll continue to be transparent. At the same time, we'll work and with the health department and make sure that folks are in compliance with the CDC guidelines and so forth. And encouraging folks, like I said, to take the vaccine. If they need to take off for that day, we'll make sure that they're able to do so. That's all I have, unless there are any other questions. That concludes my report.
Questions or comments? Did you say only 25% of our people have full vaccination so far?
Well, 25% have taken at least one, with about 12% that have taken both.
So that's 37%, less than half of our people.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Mr. Campbell, it's more of, we're around 30% of all of our staff approximately are in process of getting the vaccine or have received it.
Wow. And it's available to everybody, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell, part of the challenge that some of our staff is having is that as many have, it's not as easy as maybe it could be to get processed into the system when you're working full time and you're on the buses. So some of them are having trouble accessing the site. We're working directly with the Department of Health to try and get an on-site vaccine clinic. We know that with flu shots and with others, when we can have that here, the COVID testing, when it's here and people can do it prior to their shift or after their shift or come in, they're more likely to utilize it. Unfortunately, the Department of Health has let us know that they continue to have a shortage of available vaccines to be able to provide that on site here. We will continue to work with them.
Thank you. And we do need to flag the fact that we've had some shortage of drivers able to fulfill their. We've had to drop some routes in the last week or two because of this. So we do need to help any way we can in the recruitment of drivers, not only for what we need now, but if we actually want to expand regionally. The major hold on us will be the availability of staff at this point in time. So Tim, anything we can do to support you as you guys look forward to recruitment and training? Any new ideas you have, anything we could throw a little money at? Please help us here.
Oh, most definitely. Anything we can do together to make sure that we do it, because all of us realize just what you said, Reverend Campbell. It's imperative that we get those available operators, and people here have been working extra to fill the gaps as well. Driving with supervisors and other individuals. So yes, word of mouth. You can tell Lottie, Dottie, and everybody whatever we have to do to get people here. And yes, we'll continue to have those conversations, and whatever we need to present through executive staff and through the board to assistance, we'll definitely do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further questions?
Yes,
Yeah.
Tim, is there any problem getting operators into DMV? You think that could be a part of recruiting, or are you doing it in-house?
I'm glad you mentioned that, Mr. Coles. Yes, that's still a challenge, but we have looked at some different ideas. HR, particularly Melissa Shelton, she has been researching and looking at some of the things that we can do, some of the in-house. We do already have the ability to do third-party testing for the CDLs, but we're looking at how we can do the actual pre-testing for the written test as well. So we're looking at that and some other opportunities to work with the DMV on that. So just what you said, we are looking at that.
Thank you.
And looking at our drivers, what percentage do we have now that are part-time versus full-time?
We can contractually, we can go up to 13%. I know we're under 10 right now as far as the workforce. So we do have some wiggle room, and what we've had to happen in the last few months is we've had a few retirees to come back. We had one retiree come back last week. We had another retiree that I talked to a few days ago about returning, because basically that currently is our part-time workforce, is our retirees. But as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at how we can recruit, if it's college students or whomever, to help build up that part-time workforce, because we do have a little wiggle room with that.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else for Tim? Nope. So next we're at Tony, right? Mr. Carter.
Good morning, everyone. I'll be going on the safety performance report for the month of March, found on 39 and 40 of the board packet. Starting off, if you review the report, you notice that we did change the format up a little bit. Wanted to give you some more definition on the actual type of accidents that we had, as well as give you some graphs and tables on preventable versus non-preventable accidents when it comes to passenger and traffic accidents over the last year. We broke this down by the month and the numbers of non-preventable versus preventable accidents we've gotten per month. Going into the actual report for the month of March, we had a total of 12 passenger incidents, a total of 33 vehicular accidents, and the type of accidents that we found had the greatest variance from the month of February to the month of March were damage to outside mirrors of the bus, which we had 7, and buses being rear-ended, which we also had 7. What we want to do is continue with the actual feedback that we're getting on the operators when they come in and actually watch those videos with the training staff. This is giving us good positive feedback so far as reducing the type of accidents. They're getting a lot of background information on things that they shouldn't have done to cause these accidents. And they're getting a lot of information from so far as their safety techniques and reminding them of things to do to avoid these type of accidents in the future. As Tim mentioned, we're still doing the training from our virtual learning platforms. Right now, you have a company-wide training going with active shooting and fire preparedness. But in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a training that's going to be geared toward the operators, and this will be safety techniques while operating a commercial vehicle. Like I said, we're getting good feedback from the operators, and they're saying that they're learning a lot for these virtual learning platforms. Some of the takeaways for the month, or takeaways for the report for the month of March. We did see an increase in accidents. We saw an increase from the month of February to the month of March. Also, we saw a lot that the accidents were non-preventable, meaning that they weren't the operator's fault, but we still did see an overall increase, and we don't like to see increases in numbers from month to month, especially when it comes to our safety accidents. We saw an increase in passenger type accidents. This is just because, as Tim alluded to, we are seeing more people riding, we are seeing more people coming out, vaccinations are opening up, and more people are actually out riding a bus and out and about. One thing that we do want you to take away is there's an increase in accidents across the board, not only with GRTC, not only with transit, but across the board, vehicular, and looking at safety highway reports, vehicular accidents are up. A lot of this is from distracted driving. A lot of it is from the summer months are coming up and more people are actually coming out, as well as speed. We're seeing an awful lot of distracted drivers out there, and we're continuing to remind the operators to not only make good decisions while they're driving the bus and while they're operating the bus with their passengers, but also look out for others around them and try to make decisions so that they can avoid accidents altogether. We've also seen, and I mentioned this early, we had the bus that was rear-ended 7 times in the month of March. Now, if you remember, that's been a type of accident that we've seen consistently increase for the last couple months. Transportation, maintenance, and safety department are working together so that we come up with some ideas to make the back of the bus a little bit more visible. We're coming up with some reflective tape type situations, some signs that we're going to put on the bus. We're throwing out the idea of installing more lights on the back of the bus, but of course, all these things have to be reviewed and made sure that some of them are actually legal to do, but we are working to come up with some ideas so that we make the back of the bus a little bit more visible so that we can reduce those type of accidents as well. We continue with the safety blitz. Training staff, supervisors from transportation are out monitoring operations so far as making sure everybody's doing everything they possibly can to be as safe as possible. Also monitoring the interaction between the operators and the customers and passengers to make sure that they're being as professionally done as possible, as these all will reduce the amount of accidents that we have from month to month. And ultimately, like I said, that's our goal, to make sure that everybody is operating in the safest manner possible. If there are no questions, that concludes the actual safety performance report for the month of March. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Questions or comments?
Just a real quick question for you, Tony. You mentioned all the additional rear end collisions. Do you know if there's a time of day that that's happening? Is that happening mainly at night or mainly during the day?
Actually, it's both. I mean, we're having them at night and we're having them during the day. It's across the board. That's why we were saying that, you know, you would think that you'd be able to see the back of the bus, but it just comes down to the distraction. And, you know, across the board, distracted driver, high rates of speed. I mean, and the accidents that we're seeing, we're not seeing, you know, at the light and the car bumps the back of the bus. We're seeing head on straight rear end. So we've got to do something to put it out there that, you know, this is the bus, do everything we can to make it as visible as possible. But yeah, it's happening both during the day and at night.
Thank you.
I know this is serious, but nonetheless, it kind of chuckle when you say to make the back of the bus more visible, as big as the bus.
Yeah.
So when somebody hits the back of the bus wins, right?
Yeah, most cases it's not a good outcome for the vehicle, but you know, in all seriousness, it's a bad situation, and we try to eliminate that as much as possible. But yeah,
none of this stuff relates to issues of the pulse lanes and people improperly being in them, or that issue.
No, I mean, honestly, it's not really the pulse. It's other fixed routes, that type of thing.
Okay. Further questions?
As a city driver, I mean, I applaud us, you know, seeing a problem and trying to look in the mirror, even though we know, you know, hey, you know, buses are getting rear-ended, you know, and because I sort of get it. When the buses take off fairly slowly and they stop fairly slowly, at least that's the way it looks when you're a driver. And our cars accelerate faster, and sometimes we stop slower too. And it doesn't, because of the scale or whatever, there's something visual that just has you on that bus fairly quickly. I will say I've had that experience myself. So anything that we can do, again, to maybe not necessarily, you know, as Danny said, you know, is making it more visible, but just allowing that visual, you know, as far as lights or reflectors or something to process a little faster, because you know, I have to believe, you know, people don't think that they're driving automated Teslas every day and, you know, are sitting in the back seat. You know, there's something that's going on visually, and I've had a bit of an experience myself. It's not our fault, but I do believe it's our responsibility to take a step forward, and I'm really happy to see that that's the approach that we're taking. So thank you, Ms. Carter. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Carter, have you noticed any increase in boarding and alighting since we're using the center door for both?
We have had an increase in some of the passenger accidents. You know, it's not so much as the center door as the front door, and we're working with the operators to make sure that they're properly doing what they're supposed to do when they do decide to let people use the front door. Some of the more disability type situations, the elderly are still boarding in the front door. So we're reminding them of those techniques, what to do properly, how to, you know, allow them to board the bus properly through the front door. So far as the center door, we really haven't seen a whole lot of an increase in that, but we're still reminding the operators, you know, to take the proper precautions when they're boarding and alighting from the bus.
Thank you. All right, thanks very much, Mr. Carter. I see we now have a combined report from Adrian, Emily, and Tim.
Yes, we will be tag teaming a quarterly report. I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, this is the third quarter report on productivity, so performance metrics that we kind of established at the beginning of the fiscal year. It is a lot of material since we've gone through 3 quarters, so I'm going to kind of hit the high level. If you guys have any questions as I go through the different metrics, you're welcome to ask. And then Emily and Tim are going to jump into on-time performance, what they've kind of been working on over the fiscal year, and kind of next steps. All right, so the first category I'm going to go over is BRT. BRT is currently, we only have one of them, so currently it's in its own category. And one thing I'm going to kind of identify is that you'll see, and Tim touched on quite a bit of this, but you'll see this trend throughout all of the various categories, but it's just kind of a decrease in what I call the passenger miles, passenger trips, and revenue hours because of, he mentioned the outs because of COVID, as well as January, we had a significant decrease in several days of no service because of the snow. But overall for ridership, just quarter 1 to quarter 2, we saw an increase in pulse, but you'll see this decrease in quarter 2 to 3. Next category is arterial. And I included the images this time around just to see how the network works together through the categories. So this is a lot of the main corridors. Many of them cross from one end of the cities to the other, some of them hitting jurisdictions, different jurisdictions throughout, but the majority, about 50% of their route is on a major corridor or thoroughfare and hits activity centers. So this is showing, again, the ridership hours and miles, and this is by the route themselves. I did include a total for categories for ridership hours and miles overall. You could see that this is about 1 million, so this represents a big majority of our local route system right here. Across the board, you do see a decrease in quarter 2 to quarter 3 for ridership, as well as hours and miles. What this one shows is the productivity. So we have passengers per hour, passengers per mile, total cost per passenger, and passengers per trip. And I'm just going to identify the ones that are kind of red and yellow. This is the one actually Reverend Kimball mentioned when we put it in this category, the Route 50. It is an arterial because it is on a main street, but we have been monitoring it. I wanted to keep it in this category since we did do the extension back in September to go further. It went all the way downtown now. Because of the way it's designed, the frequency is 40 minutes. It is more of a, I would say, either a connector or even more of a neighborhood route to get to main route. So you'll see when the next fiscal year occurs, we will put this probably in a more relevant category, and it shouldn't be as stark as far as red and yellow. The next category is community radial, and you'll see this network, it connects to the arterial route. So if you only had the community radials, you really wouldn't be able to get anywhere, but it connects more so the neighborhoods, the outliers, to the rest of the system to be able to transfer. And again, I'm just going to identify the same trend where you'll see the decrease in this particular quarter from ridership to miles as well as hours. The 2 routes here that are in red are our Route 76 and our 77. I heard the 77 a public comment in the beginning, and I also touched on it a bit when I talked about the expansion kind of priorities related to CBTA. The 77 was designed to kind of be the service between U of R, museum area, the FAN, and BCU, because it was designed for kind of the purpose of the universities. they are still kind of not at their full levels that we had anticipated at this point in time. So we are not seeing the potential of that particular route. So as you saw with the CBTA expansion, kind of doing a main carry or a combination with the Route 5 is something that we are kind of prioritizing to look at in FY22. So I just wanted to note that that one is staying on our radar. We have identified that it has not done what we'd hoped it would do. So we will probably see changes for that one. The 76, we are also continuing to monitor. The circulator feeder connector, again, this is one that is designed for these outer routes to connect to neighborhoods, and they tie in with whether it's pole station. You'll see a lot of these actually hit what I call our neighborhood transfer center. So out here is 23rd and Franklin, this is Southside Plaza, up here is Chamberlain and Wilmer, and this is Willow Lawn. So it gets to those main transfer hubs and then connects to the arterial network. The routes in this category, I'm just going to say the same trend. You'll see a decrease in kind of all of the categories. Two routes that are yellow and red, we'll see kind of total cost per passenger is kind of the main reason is the 88 and 18. The 88 is a peak only service and kind of designed for the Philip Morris workers to get there. So it is one that will have a higher cost. It does have less trips than some of the other routes. And then the 18 is an hourly service and only operates on the weekdays today. Last category is Express. This Express kind of varied. Some actually increases did happen. There are some decreases for ridership as well. Overall, service did decrease with hours and miles though for this quarter. And typical kind of the express routes where there's quite a few red categories. The 23 usually is red, and that's because it only has about 2 or 3 trips and not that many riders. So the cost of it is just more expensive than others in terms of who uses it and the cost. And then the 26 as well, and 95 just being a long route ends up being more costly. And I am going to shift over to on-time performance, and Emily's going to kind of kick that off.
Yeah, so Tim and I will be kind of sharing this section, and we'll be delving deeper into on-time performance, the on-time performance section of the quarterly report. Just to kind of give you some intro, some background and context for you, as Tim noted in his previous presentation, as of March 2021, we are scoring at 66% for on-time performance. So to give you an idea of where we stand versus before our transit network plan, so back in August of 2017, we were at 72% system-wide. So we have seen a decline since then. Over this fiscal year so far, we have been holding steady right at about 66%. So we're maintaining, but in this presentation, we want to talk to you about some of the things that we're doing to both not only just maintain, but improve our on-time performance, of course, because that's our goal. So I'll go into a little bit of kind of our process here for how we look at on-time performance. And like I said, Tim and I will go into what we're doing to make changes and improve the on-time performance. So just to give you a refresher, on-time performance is defined as a bus leaving a predetermined bus stop or time point along a route within a time period that is no more than 1 minute earlier and no more than 5 minutes later than the published schedule time. So many times we are reporting to you our on-time performance at the system level or the route level. But in order to actually get those metrics, we're looking at really granular data. So we're actually looking to get those numbers, we're analyzing our performance from stop to stop on every single one of our routes. So we have hundreds of time points in our system. So as you can imagine, it's fairly time intensive, and it's also complex. There's no one size fits all fix that we can apply that's going to across the board improve performance. So this part of our analysis is really diving in and looking at that granular level, stop to stop, what can we do to improve our performance on every route. And this will be an iterative process for us. So as we kind of go through this analysis, we'll continue to do this to make small improvements that will hopefully have big results in improving our on-time performance. So first, I'll kind of go into what the scheduling department is doing to address this problem, and then I'll hand it over to Tim to talk more about the transportation side. So we have been analyzing our run times to determine how operators are performing in comparison to the schedule. So we've combed through all that granular time point to time point data, and we've identified trends. So where are operators consistently running early as compared to our schedule versus where they're maybe running late consistently. And we've adjusted our run times in the schedule to match what's happening on the street. So like I said, that's really very granular. We're doing that from stop to stop as we go through the analysis. And then part of that, we've also identified areas where maybe operators aren't actually doing something consistently on the street. Maybe some operators are, we see are performing early and some are performing late on the same segment. So in those areas, we have been working with transportation to identify what is the root of the problem on the street. So it might not be a schedule fix that will solve this issue, but we need to get a better idea of actually what the problem is on the street itself so we can address that. And that's really something that scheduling and transportation need to work together to solve the problem. So I will hand it over to Tim to talk about kind of the active management side of things from the transportation department.
Thanks, Emily. So as Emily stated, with the reports that we're able to generate and identify, specific routes, segments of routes, as well as operators, we can then go back and look at each of those and actually go out and do trail checks where we're following buses, ride-alongs, and then determining what those issues are. In some cases, if we're running early, for example, is it due to less traffic on the streets? Is it due also in part because of less dwell time at the stops, because there's no interaction with the fare box because we've been free fare for over a year. So those are the things that we're looking at, and we're getting that feedback from the operators to get that directly over to planning and scheduling so that we can look at what adjustments we do need to make. And as I mentioned in prior reports that we still have some construction and road work in the area, particularly in the downtown area, that can affect us on the late side, for example. So once we identify those root causes, get with scheduling and planning, we can make those adjustments accordingly. And we also, on a real-time basis, looking at Clever. We have the ability to look at Clever CAD, to look and see how each bus is running in terms of early, late, so forth. So the radio dispatchers, the supervisor on the street can look at that. They can quickly give feedback to the operator so that they can either stop at a particular stop and wait for a few minutes and let the customers know what's going on, or they can stop at a stop before that if it's unsafe to stop at a particular stop for whatever reason. And we're also utilizing administrative staff. We're bringing some folks in to the radio room, giving them the training, the tools to look at Clever as well, to help the radio dispatchers to get an extra set of eyes on the service to be able to identify and make those real-time adjustments. We've also distributed memos. We've done videos and postings to make sure the operators are aware of what the on-time performance is, the importance of it, and asking for their feedback as we get with them to make sure that we are addressing it and get proper adjustments to the schedule. So there's a feedback form that we've had it for quite some time, and we've asked operators and supervisors and so forth to fill out those forms, get them over to scheduling and planning so they can look at it on their end and analytically look at where we can make those adjustments accordingly.
So I'll go ahead and use the same categories that Adrian just used to talk about productivity. We'll use the same categories for on-time performance. So as you can see, BRT, the category of 1, it's doing quite well at 76%. So one thing to note here, the BRT is handled slightly differently than the other routes in that it is much more headway based. So we do not provide public timetables with every scheduled time point as we do with the other routes for the BRT. But our customers know that the frequency is so high that they can expect a bus to come every 10 or 15 minutes. And with that, transportation is actually utilizing active management now on this route. And they're making sure to maintain that headway rather than necessarily focusing on the specific scheduled time. So as we can see with that approach, we've gotten pretty good results. Moving on to the next category, our arterial routes. As Adrian said, these travel through our major thoroughfares. So something to note here, you see there's a lot of yellow and red in this category. Some challenges with achieving high on-time performance here it has a lot to do with the actual characteristics of these routes. So they're traveling very long distances. And this can be challenging with on-time performance because you can kind of get a domino effect. If an operator falls behind early on in their route, they are going to be triggering that they're running late for every time point thereafter. And it's not until they get all the way to their other end of line where they're getting a layover and they can recover and get back on track. So something else to kind of consider here, these routes are traveling through our downtown. And as we know, we can have traffic, kind of unpredictable traffic there. Maybe there might be construction or car accidents, things like that, that we can schedule around a rush hour and traffic that we know is going to happen during certain times. But of course, those more sporadic instances that are more common downtown, we're not able to schedule around those. So those do have big impacts to our on-time performance. Scheduling has, as I said, we've gone through the analysis and we've worked with Tim to make changes, schedule changes to our runtimes for the 5, the 7A, 7B, and the 50. And we've also worked with transportation to identify on the other routes potential areas for active management to address some of those. Moving on to community radials. So as Adrian said, these travel through more of our neighborhoods and they connect to arterials. There is a great deal of inconsistency in the on-time performance from time point to time point in these categories. So like I mentioned earlier, that means that some operators might be on the same time point running early while others are running late. So the analysis in this section really helped try kind of hone in on what areas we might be able to work with transportation to get a better idea of what's happening on the street. So just to give you a quick example, the Route 111, I mentioned earlier that we were working on making some runtime improvements for our June booking. What we did, we looked through the data and we found that actually the end of line seems to be where we're having a lot of inconsistency. So both at Food Lion and John Tyler, we were seeing that our operators were kind of treating those stops differently. So we found some areas that we could adjust the runtime to help address the on-time performance there. But then we've also been in communication with Tim and his team to help identify what operators are doing and give them a clearer message on what we need them to do in order to achieve good on-time performance. So this is a really great example of when scheduling and transportation can work together to address the problem from two different sides. Moving on to our circulators, they're actually operating fairly well comparatively, and this is probably largely due to the characteristics of the category as a whole. So these are covering largely kind of outlying areas, and they're not really traveling through our major thoroughfares where there's heavy traffic or kind of those accidents or constructions like I mentioned earlier. So scheduling has made runtime adjustments to the 18, 88, and 91 for the June booking, and we've also identified on the other routes those areas that might benefit from active management. Moving on to our express routes, So the 23, 26, and 27, as I mentioned, are operated by SpecTrans. So we didn't do the same analysis on their data just because it's collected differently than our fixed route is collected. So as far as the other routes, you are seeing low on-time performance, kind of following trend with the productivity that Adrienne presented in her section. And for on-time performance, this is really largely due to the limited number of trips that all these routes run. So any trip that's having poor on-time performance, because there are so few trips, of course, that is, it makes it look much worse in the end because there's just less trips to balance it out. Also to consider for these express routes, they are traveling on interstates. And so we have, of course, a lot of traffic impacts during those times. They're also predominantly traveling during our peak hours, which, as we know, on interstates are going to be those times that we have the most kind of inconsistent traffic due to accidents and things like that. So we will continue to monitor these and work with transportation to address problems and improve on-time performance in this category. So as far as next steps in this process, we will continue to monitor overall productivity and performance, and we will continue to address the on-time performance at the route level. Like I mentioned earlier, this will be an iterative process that we'll continue to dive into and work between planning, scheduling, and transportation to address some of those on-time issues.
Right, thank you. Elder, do you want to say something?
Yes, Tim, do we have a next bus system? Next bus system on the street?
I'm sorry, what were you saying, Mr. Cole?
Yeah, I said, do we have a next bus system on the street?
Eldridge, can you define that?
Well, when the bus passes a certain stop, there was a sign or something that says the next bus is due at whatever, in 5 minutes or 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever.
I mean, we have that for the Pulse, you know, at all of these stations along the Pulse corridor. You know, we have that, you know, illuminated on the signage to let you know how far away the next bus is.
Right, next bus system.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. And it's only at the Pulse station?
Yes.
Okay.
But Mr. Coles, we also have other technologies, though.
Yeah, that's what I was about to elaborate before the lights went out on me. Rob, because I was about to say as far as what the customers are able to
see,
look up on their apps and so forth to be able to receive that information as well. But Rob just chimed in, so he could probably elaborate on it.
Sorry about that, Tim. I was just hopping in to help there. Yes, so we have the predictive real-time arrival throughout the system. On the Pulse, there's physical signs at the stations,
right,
but throughout our system, you can view it not only on our website, but on our mobile app as well as we're publishing the real-time transit feed here with Transit app here shortly, and then you'll be able to look at it there. So many different avenues.
Yeah.
If I may add to that, I'm sorry, Mr. Coles.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, if I can add to that, we understand that a fairly large percentage of our riders do have smartphones. However, if your smartphone does lose its charge, or if you don't have it with you that particular day, or if you don't happen to have a smartphone, that technology, while it is an incredible improvement, and I'm very excited about the advances coming, it can be something that can leave people without that. We've been talking about and looking into possible additional launches of real-time information and next bus technology around the system, specifically maybe at some of the transfer centers and some of the other areas that can give a little bit more of that to our riders. And we're also looking at technologies that as we buy new buses, we're going to have USB ports in those in the future, not now, so that people can charge their phones and continue to use that digital technology to have a better understanding of arrival times and destination times.
Yeah, I know at one time there were next bus at some of the major transfer points downtown in the downtown area. Next bus 2 minutes away, minute away, whatever. I know coming out of the East End, There was one like at 21st and Broad or 21st and Marshall, westbound, and places like that. And it was a sign that would light up, illuminate, saying next bus, so many, minutes away for the customer to see.
Correct.
Not just on the cell phone.
And also to elaborate on what Julie spoke about, if our customer doesn't have a smartphone, we also have our ride text system with that even a regular cell phone can use that provides that information as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, other comments? Did I understand from this report, and thank you for the comprehensive report, by the way, folks, did I understand that ridership is down this quarter from last quarter?
Yes, sorry. Ridership, turn my video back on. Ridership overall for the quarter is down. For the month of March, we did see an increase, I think, as Tim said, but the majority, I think, it's a couple of things. And we have a shorter quarter, and then the impact also of those service impacts from the weather in January had a significant impact.
Interesting. And what's your goal on on-time performance?
Our goal is 80% for our local routes, express routes, I think is 90%, as well as the Pulse is 90%.
Okay, so just, and I do appreciate how we're beginning to target on this, although I think we're still at the beginning stage of our targeting being effective. But you talk about traffic downtown and things like that. I mean, it would seem to me that if I drive to work every day and find out that the traffic delays me, then I allow more time to drive to work every day. Is there tremendous inconsistency in people's experience and drivers' experience with these routes? I don't understand this. It doesn't make sense to me.
And I can speak at it from just the data side, and Tim's about to jump into probably more of the reality. But I mean, that was kind of an issue. Emily highlighted the routes that we saw where basically we looked at all of the operator performance. And if the operators were doing the same thing, like all of them were running 5 minutes early between one stop to the other, that made us comfortable that they were always encountering the same traffic every day. Let's adjust the route to compensate for that 5 minutes. But if we look at that same thing and we saw that every operator was kind of doing something different, it could be, and let's say traffic is the variable there. It could be that just the traffic impacted each of them at different times, or it was unpredictable. So we couldn't change it if one of them was doing that stop to stop in 1 minute, one of them doing it in 10 minutes, one of them doing it in 7 minutes. Changing it when you have like a defined time for running, it really wouldn't help our on-time performance. And that's kind of what we're having an issue where we're seeing inconsistencies. I mean, there is a lot happening downtown, where you saw on Emily's map where all the ones that were kind of in the peripheral, they were doing great. They were kind of above our on-time performance, or at least what we want, above 70% we've seen in the past. But the others where there's just such long routes or unpredictability because they hit downtown, so we're having a little bit of a struggle. And then we're honing in on the variable of operator, and I'll pass it over to Tim. Where that kind of reality is coming in, where they are kind of encountering different things or making different decisions out there when they're actually on the street.
Yeah, and just to piggyback a little bit of what Adrian was saying, because what we do is, of course, nobody's been here lately visiting wise, but in our radio room, we have 8 monitors that are up, and we're able to go into the VDOT camera feeds. And look at some of those. And certain days, you'll see traffic, running fine, no issues. Then other days, you'll see, backups, whether it's 95 or 64 or the interchange or what have you. What's going on in any given day to see what those patterns could be. And as Adrian said, in some cases, there is that level of inconsistency. But I think as we start to see more movement, people going about, either back to work or moving around the area, we may start to see more consistent traffic. as we go forward.
Okay. And do you have a way of tracking individual drivers in terms of their how they do it?
Yes.
On whatever their brand is, so you can see who's nailing it and who's consistently missing.
Yes, yes. Myself and the other supervisors and so forth. You know, we've been doing those follow-up trail checks. Been speaking with them individually because we can identify and see exactly what they're doing and so forth. And we've seen in some cases, you know, a consistent issue of the earlies. I mentioned earlier some of the things around that as far as the pandemic goes, with less traffic and on some of those routes, less dwell time. The layovers have some impact as well. So those are the things that we've noticed as we follow and check with the operators and find some of those ones that are underperforming.
Okay, thank you. Further comments or questions?
I have a question, Tim.
I will add
Go ahead.
a big change from the old system to the current system. I want to highlight the transfer site, because every route pretty much ended at the transfer facility downtown. And the way that on-time performance also route works is the last time point does not count. So if people were heading downtown, even if they were early or late, if you hit the last time point, it didn't impact you. So downtown just had less of an impact than it did in the past. Because a lot of our routes during the day, as I mentioned earlier, they're through routes now. So the time points through downtown do count towards on-time.
Got it.
I have a question. Do you ever adjust the performance goal? I mean, or strictly that's the goal, we've got to meet that, or?
That's a good point, Mr. Smith, because you know, we're having conversations on our KPIs across the board, and on-time performance is one of them. So as we look at our system and the trend over the last year or two, you know, we may want to look at what adjustments we do need to make. Is 80% the right number? You know, should it be a different number that we look at? You know, we want to make sure that overall, you know, we provide good, reliable service so that customers know to expect the bus at a certain time. And is that targeted number where it should be? But yes, we are having those conversations.
Are the drivers aware of whether they're meeting or not meeting the goals at all? I mean, are they kind of outside of this? We're looking at this and they don't realize they're not meeting the performance goal, or that they did on or whatever.
Yeah, that's what's going on right now. A lot of them didn't realize it, or if they did, they didn't pay too much attention to it, to be honest with you. So yes, you know, we do monitor near the dispatch area. We have videos looping, and one of them is a video specifically talking about on-time performance. And like I said, we put memos and postings out, kind of getting the word out as well. And then when we do those time notices and messages out to the operators on specific routes, when they're doing it at that point in time, they'll also realize, oh, well, oh yeah, now they're watching me, or now I see what's going on. Because the consoles on the buses, they also know, you know, when they're running early. So it's not just part of what we need to do, is them also self-policing and making sure that they do what they're supposed to do, because they have the ability to look and see what they're doing as well.
Do you have a breakout on off time from early and late?
Yes, it's broken down: earlies, on time, and late.
So which is worse for which are we having more of?
My issue is the early.
Yeah, mine is too.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, not only is a customer looking for at a certain point and the bus is already gone, you know, that's pretty bad. But you know, what I've noticed is that we have a significant amount of those earlies, and if we can just whittle that down a little bit, you know, we should get, you know, some, you know, immediate dividends to see some positive results.
Okay.
Mr. Campbell, Mr. Chairman, if I can also add to what Tim has been doing and Adrian have been doing in talking to our operators directly and engaging them in this issue, we have had several of our operators communicate back to us solutions or requests for more information about how to make it better. So we are actively engaging them, Tim, and the scheduling and operations, and we've gotten some very positive feedback from them where they are trying to help us resolve these issues.
Excellent. Comments, questions, further ones? Thank you so much for this report, and it's very helpful and interesting. Ready to move on to Rob, you got an action item here?
Yes, sir. Good morning. How is everyone?
Good.
Back in October, the board approved the purchase of 35 additional vehicles for our paratransit operations. These were wheelchair accessible vehicles. Part of that order is now getting ready to be delivered here in May. And as the board knows, that we install both audio and visual recording devices on all of our vehicles for safety purposes. And we are now needing to procure the equipment and the installation services for those first 15 vehicles that will be delivered. This is going to be purchased entirely with federal, local, and state funds. The system includes the recorder, the cameras, as well as the installation. It will come with 3 years of warranty extended. And all of the installations are going to be performed by the vendor and be completed by the end of June. So the recommendation is that the board of directors authorizes the CEO to issue a purchase order to Luminator, which is the Apollo video technology, for the purchase of this system and installation at a cost of $118,855.
You recommend this, Mr. Taggart?
Yes, sir.
All right. Could I have a motion to approve this?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of this expenditure, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? It's approved. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Zenzarella.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so we're up to slide 70 in the board package. We're going to start with the source of use statement here. These are the NTD format. So starting off, for the 8 months ended February 28th, 2021, revenues are unfavorable by about a little over $1 million on a budget of $40.2 million. The directly generated funds are favorable by about $233,000 on a budget of $1.3 million, and that's based upon favorable advertising revenue and the university pass revenue being ahead of what was anticipated in the budget. The advertising revenues in this category here, and the university passes up here. Offsetting some of that favorable performance in the category of other agency revenues is unfavorable interest revenue, which is due to lower than expected cash balances during the first 5 months of the fiscal year, and some budgetary assumptions with regards to what the return would be. Going down to the next category on the local government funds, it's unfavorable versus budget of about $164,000 on a budget of $9 million. This is basically, as you'll see when we talk about the operating expenses are favorable to budget. So when we're invoicing some of the local governments, it's based upon the actual operating expenses and then backing down what the revenues that are coming in from the state and the Fed. So with operating expenses lower, obviously, our revenue is a little bit lower, and we'll see that as well in the federal funds. State government funds are favorable to budget by about $1.1 million on a budget of $6.4 million. And that's just favorable operating contributions from the state of Virginia versus what the budgetary assumptions were. The federal funds are unfavorable, about $2.1 million on a budget of $23.4 million. And this, once again, the Fed money is more or less, we're taking our actual operating expenses that are incurred for the month and submitting them for reimbursement. So with operating expenses down, the revenues are down. And more importantly is when we look at the combination of revenues relative to expenses for whether we're increasing or decreasing fund position, which we'll see later in another chart. So moving on to slide 71, this is kind of the narrative, just that there's some of the detailed schedules are more like an eye chart. So I kind of summarize them here just in the categories where it might be a little more visible to see. And you can see the various categories, both in tabular as well as in a chart format. And, basically what I've just shared is captured here as the highlights. And you can see the pie charts, the components of the budgeted revenue versus the actual revenue as well. So moving over, this one's really an eye chart I'm going to talk through. I apologize. This is on slide 72, and we do have the same narrative on slide 73 to 75, which shows more detail. But this is the NTD format, and I could just walk you through it in the high level like I did last time. basically for the 8 months ended February 28th, the operating expenses are favorable to budget by around $3.2 million. And you'll see that number down here where it's about 8.11%. So coinciding revenues are off, are unfavorable by about $1 million. However, offsetting that is favorable operating expense performance. So the net would be a positive surplus for the 8 months. The highlights of this up here on the top line here in this bold here is basically the labor category, and that's $1.3 million to budget. And that's the budget is $25.1 million. And this is primarily due to open positions and the timing of hiring. Now, this chart as it's set up is broken up. This is the total of the 1.3 million. It's broken up into vehicle operations, vehicle maintenance, facility maintenance, and the general administrative section. So the total labor variance for the vehicle operations is about 656,000. So about half of the contribution of the favorable labor variances is in the vehicle operations. And the second line on the operators' wages and salaries are favorable about 186,000, as you heard Tim mention before, that headcount is favorable. However, there's offsetting overtime, which I'll show later in the detailed chart that offsets a little bit of that. You also have a contribution of non-revenue vehicle salaries and wages, which is about 216,000 favorable, which is seen here. And then the remaining portion of this is in the fringe benefits, or about $260,000. That's as a function of lower than headcount. The budgeted headcount for the vehicle operations is 323 personnel, and some of the favorableness is offset by overtime. On the vehicle maintenance, there's 314,000 of the labor variance, of which 194,000 of it is reflected in the maintenance salaries, and the remaining portion, about $95,000 down here, is reflected in favorable fringe benefits. Once again, it's a function of lower than budgeted headcount. Therefore, the health medical expenses are favorable as well. General administrative expenses on the labor up here, $405,000 favorable, of which $159,000 is due to wages shown here, and the balance of $246,000 is on the fringe benefit, once again due to vacancies. In the middle of this chart here, we have the services line item, which is favorable about 1.15 million on the budget of 2.8 million, and that's the result of a couple of aspects, primarily of this, upon having zero-based fares, and also due to the timing of building maintenance versus the budget counterization. On this line item here, which is the professional and technical services, it's favorable $303,000, and that's where you see the favorableness of the BRT fare collection and security services, which is around $216,000. And then also the advertising and promotion is favorable down here around $36,000. Moving down to the second category, which contract maintenance, is about $523,000 favorable here, and that's comprised primarily of a favorable variance on the BRT station maintenance, as well as building maintenance by about $405,000. So you can see those components in there as well. Dropping down to the materials and supplies consumed section down here, you'll see the overall variance is unfavorable. This is unfavorable about 1.2 million, and this is primarily due to the higher cleaning and sanitizing expenses due to COVID. And once again, these expenses are being submitted to the Fed as revenue based on the CARES Act, so they're being offset. But that just shows some of the impact of what COVID is costing to keep our operators as well as our passengers and employees safe. Down here on the bottom part, the purchase transportation is favorable at 1.8 million, and this is due to less demand for services due to COVID. So sliding over to slide, this would be 73, starting with, this is the OPEX components, just so you can take that eye chart and you can see the categories. You can see what we've just shared with the various operating expense categories in both the table as well as in bar chart form. Looking at here on the total revenue miles that were generated during the 8-month period, you have about 3.66 million revenue miles. When you take that against the actual operating expenses of 35.9 million, you come up with an operating expense per mile about $9.80. And then when you look at it for about 330,000 revenue hours, on that 35.9 million expenses, you come up with an operating expense per hour around $108.8 per hour.
So John, when you do that operating expense per mile, is that all of our expenses over against operations, or just a portion of our expenses over against operations?
That figure there is what's called a fully burdened or fully loaded. So that's got your variable, any step variable, as well as period. And it's a very good question, because when you start looking at expansion, there's certain aspects of the expenses that would increase, and there's other ones that would increase after you get to a certain portion, of certain like throughput or so.
Okay.
Down here, I've included the narrative, and then I've provided a little more breakdown here of the operating expense per mile, breaking it down by the 4 components: vehicle operations, maintenance, facility maintenance, and general administration, and then broken down the operating expense per mile. This would be across the labor category from left to right. So this is including the G&A portions as well. But you can see, looking at this table here, you can see that roughly labor is around 2/3 of the expenses associated with running the operation. And coming down here, when you look at the operating expense per hour, the vehicle operations is around 59% of the total portion. Going further down in here, you can see is on which is now on slide 75. You can see the head count for the month ending February. There was about 14 favorable relative to the budget of 474. You can see the impact in transportation as well as in the equipment and facility maintenance, which is driving those numbers. And then you see the stacked bar charts for overtime, and you can see that the top one is basically just looking at the pay periods in the month of February. They don't specifically line up with the first 28 days because there's overlap based on our pay periods, but I've kind of tried to align them the best I could. You can see that in the transportation, we had almost 9.5% of the hours of overtime, and that reflects probably about 1,300 hours of overtime on a base of around 32,000 transportation hours. Looking at it on a year-to-date basis, through the 8 months, overtime is around 8.4% on the transportation, and the down here in the portion of the base transportation hour, there's over 583,000 operator hours, and the overtime is around 43,000 hours, just to give you some perspective.
Are we paying time and a half for overtime?
Yes. So moving over to the traditional income statement, which is on slide 76, you can see that the operating revenue over here on a year-to-date basis is favorable $330,000 on a budget of $822,000 roughly. And this primarily is being driven by the favorable advertising revenue, plus the University Pass program, and it's from the items that we mentioned prior. On the other income is unfavorable by around $97,000, and you can see here the two components are basically interest income and non-transportation revenue. On the operating contributions down here in total, the operating contributions are unfavorable about $1.26 million. As I mentioned in the prior source of revenue slide, you can see that on the federal piece up here of $1 million and $1.3 million. Those are basically driven on expense reimbursement submitted to the Fed. So as you can see, the operating expenses down below are favorable. Hence the revenue that's being submitted for reimbursement is lower than what was originally budgeted, because we obviously, when we budgeted that there would be no surplus or any deficiency. So coming back down to the operating expenses, as I mentioned prior, and consistent with the other one, is favorable about $3.2 million. And you can see equipment and facilities is the only one that's unfavorable. And that's basically due to the costs associated with cleaning and sanitizing. And then you see the other areas such as transportation, planning, scheduling, marketing, insurance, safety, general administrative. Those are all favorable. The transportation, general administration are favorable due to headcount. The insurance and safety is favorable due to favorable expenses associated with lower than the anticipated self-insurance claims that were budgeted for fiscal 21. And the purchase of services, the 1.8 million, as we saw in the NTD version of the operating expenses, that's just favorable due to the COVID reduction of ridership due to COVID. all in all, as I mentioned prior, the change in net position for the 8 months is a positive positive surplus of $2.1 million by function of the expenses being lower than budgeted, offsetting any deficiency in the revenue versus budget. Moving over to slide 77, the balance sheet for the period ending 8 months, February 28 of 2021.
Don, excuse me for a minute, but why is the operating contribution for Chesterfield unfavorable by 287,000?
Okay, because in the way that the revenue for Chesterfield is calculated, it takes the operating expenses associated for those routes relative to the mileage, and then it backs off the revenue for that comes in from the federal and the state. And because the operating expenses are favorable to budget, it's creating a variance on the revenue. Therefore, theoretically, if our operating expenses were on par and there was no favorable variance, they would be charged more. They're getting the benefit of the favorable variance versus the revenue. However, when we budgeted it, it was budgeted that expense.
Okay, thank you.
So on the balance sheet, as we've talked about, you have the current period, which is ending February, you have the prior month, which is ending January, and then you have the prior year end, which was June 30th. You can see a nice trend here on the cash line. And this is a function where we've been talking over the last couple of months about the liquidity improving on the cash projections, as well as the conversion of receivables. You can see that in the month of February, at the end of January, we had 2 months of the Fed reimbursement in receivables. We've collected that. You can see that the receivable balance has come down and it's been pushed up into cash. So it's a strengthening of the balance sheet over the 8-month period. So other than that, those are primarily the items to note on the balance sheet. Moving over to slide 78, which is the cash flow projection. So this is the actual February here in the left column. You'll see that we start at the beginning balance about 3.4 million, and we're ending with about 4.8 million. So there was an increase in cash, about $1.4 million for the position in the month of February, and that's kind of what we showed. You could see on the balance sheet in the increase in the cash. We're in the process of finally in the final stages of closing March, so we're looking at another increase of about a $1.7 million in cash position in the month of March, and this is primarily, as you can see here, the quarterly operating contribution from the city of Richmond has come in here, and that's kind of one of the items that is driving the cash up as well. And then looking forward over April, May, and June, you can see that we're going to level back down to the cash levels that were seen at the end of February. Also of note, which is not on here outside the period, because we're talking about the financials through February 28, but just wanted to note the CVTA, the 15% funds during the month of March 2021. GRTC received $9.828 million in funds from the CVTA, which represents represents GRTC's portion of the revenues that were collected from collected in the local jurisdictions through January and received by VDOT through February. So we're up to pace. I just got the funding notice for the month of February's collections from the local jurisdictions that were received in VDOT in March. We should have those shortly. I know it was a little bit of whirlwind, threw a lot of data out there, but if you have any questions, I'll field them now.
John, do we have an idea of how much of our budget to actual, kind of in total, is COVID related?
For the favorable expenses, or overall? I mean, there's in general.
I mean, obviously there may be some, you have over and under budget items, but out of that, I guess you would say if it's $1 million, and obviously our expenses would be over, or maybe we're under budget. I'm just curious as how much of our budget that we could establish, and how much of that is impacted by COVID, and just an idea. I mean, it may fall in different categories.
Yeah.
And not just in one, that type of thing.
So I'm looking at, I mean, probably just to put a ballpark on it, and going back to slide 73, on the materials and supplies consumed, you have an unfavorable variance about $1.2 million. And a good portion of that is driven by additional sanitizing expenses and so forth. But then also on the purchase service transportation, you have a favorable 1.8 million. That's reduction in expenses of where we're having to purchase the service. So the net of the two is still, it becomes a positive. You know, from the expense side, you know, our cleaning our facilities as well as our buses, driving probably about, you know, a little over $1 million unfavorable variance. But then on the flip side, because the ridership's down, we're having to procure less purchase transportation.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? John, your slide 72, I really appreciate your detailed work on it, but I can't read it either on the screen or on my paper copy. So if we're going to use that as your basic explanatory slide, I need you to do something about that, or else buy me some new glasses.
I'll make it a 2-page.
Yeah, we'll break it out into the categories.
Okay, great.
Hey, John, real quick, I got one other question about, you mentioned the CPTA funds there at the end, and it may be too soon to have a good handle on it. Do you know if the revenue that we collected, how that is comparing to our projections for that same time period? Are we, is it dead on? Are we getting more money than we thought we would at this point in time? Are we getting less money?
I think one of the answer to that, I think that there was, it's difficult to forecast due to COVID because these are based upon sales and use taxes as well as the local fuels tax. So there may have been some forecasts, you know, that had come out, you know, earlier pre-COVID, but then it's probably been impacted. So it's one of the items I'm watching and trying to see, you know, what the impact, and as we come out of, you know, as people are getting vaccinated and people are coming out and about and so forth, that, you know, it should have an uptick. As you know, I look at it this way: is like with certain, you know, significant colleges being, you know, remote, and, you know, there's students spending less money in the city of Richmond, less parents driving there, and less tourism and so forth. So I think that if anything, I would say that they're probably lighter than what we expected. But I know that the folks from CVTA and so forth were conservative in what they were forecasting. So
if I may add to that, Mr. Chair and Ian and Mr. Milliken, going back to the original projections pre-COVID, we are definitely way low. The original projections pre-COVID also had all of the taxes starting collection as of July 1. And with COVID, there was the delay in the sales tax by several months. So that is seen from our FY21. They did recalculate overall considering COVID. This was before John came on board. So we're tracking, probably my gut is that we're a little bit below where we had hoped to be. John is still tracking it. We're still hoping to end the year around 18 million. But that really depends on the recovery of the economy over the next several months. But we are definitely looking at next year being significantly less than what was estimated pre-COVID, which I think pre-COVID we were looking around 30 to 32 million-ish. Now we're looking at 27, 28 million-ish, depending on how quickly we recover. Does that help?
Absolutely, yeah, that definitely helps, because it's one of the, obviously, our biggest items in our budget, and it's hard to track where it's a projection versus a lot of other revenues are more fixed. So I appreciate that.
Any further questions? Yes.
We'll talk about this a little bit more in a few moments when I talk about some of the federal relief dollars, but that absolutely is part of the strategy that Adrian spoke about earlier, and that we'll definitely need to look at for the budget. And one of the reasons why you're not seeing a more fixed budget for your review for FY22 in this agenda packet is as we're grappling through the shifts in the economy, the shifts of the use of the funding, both the relief funding as well as the CARES Act, or sorry, the CVTA money, and how that proceeds forward. But I think that a lot of the other jurisdictions are struggling with this as well, about how to forecast an unknown revenue source that's brand new under a global pandemic.
Okay, thanks very much, John. Any further questions for him?
No.
Thank you, sir, for this careful and extensive work. Tanya, I think Ms. Thompson, we have a recent and upcoming procurements item here.
Yes, sir. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
Procurement's report can be found on pages 79 and 80 of the board packet. There are two procurements within the $50,000 to $250,000 range to share with you this month. The first procurement is for portable toilets. And as you know, over the past year, COVID has impacted the availability of public restrooms across the system, making it difficult for operators to find proper facilities to relieve themselves. So since March 2020, we have been utilizing the services of Edmunds Waste Removal to provide and clean each weekday portable facilities. At this time, we are preparing to issue change order number 4 to increase the cleaning frequency at 2 heavily used locations and pay for a 5th restroom that had been offered to us complimentary up until this month. Change order 4 in the amount of $43,875 will increase the total contract value to $100,140. The restroom facilities will continue to be available to our operators through 2021. The second project is to determine the feasibility of modifying the BRT stations to accommodate 60-foot buses. We are using Kimley Horn via a contract with the Department of Rail and Public Transportation that we have access to accomplish this task. The total cost for this contract is $60,000. There are 3 new procurements projects to added to this month's list of upcoming procurements to discuss with you today. The 3-year base term for our current tire lease program for the provision and maintenance of fixed route and specialized transportation vehicles, the tires for those vehicles will end at the end of May. Next month, we will be seeking authority from the board to exercise 2 one-year options with an estimated value of $850. Procurement is currently working on 2 projects for the facilities department. The first is for snow removal. Virginia has an average of 4 snow events each year, so it is necessary to make sure that transit stops and stations are kept clear of snow and ice to keep service running smoothly. We've estimated a 5-year contract to cost approximately $195,000. And lastly, we currently have a solicitation on the street for power washing services to keep all our transit stops clean and clear. And we're estimating the cost of a 5-year contract to be approximately $370,000. So if there are no questions, that concludes my report.
I asked this question just out of curiosity. On the portable toilets, is that strictly for the operators, or is it the customers use them as well?
It's strictly for staff. And that includes operators, supervisors, anyone who's in, working along the system.
Yeah, just out of curiosity.
And these items you're telling us about, these are alerts for what we'll have to approve next meeting.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
The last 3.
Right. Okay. Any questions?
Tanya, for the snow removal, I assume, is that in addition to what the city generally does for the snow removal of the streets? This is for the stops themselves, just to make sure that they're safe?
Yes, sir.
Excellent.
We maintain our own transit stops, so that this will cover that.
Perfect.
And this is this something we pay regardless, or is it an estimate of what the payment would be?
This
based
is an
on-
estimate.
All right,
This is an estimate based on average snow events in Virginia.
okay.
If I may add to that, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Chairman, that particular contract is something that was started when the Pulse started. And so originally there was a requirement because of the snow removal on the streets adjacent to the Pulse platform that GRTC took on the responsibility of doing that clearing to make sure that there was no damage done to our platform. As we move forward, when we have a temporary transfer plaza, when we have other areas that are also impacted by snow, my discussion with staff is that we extended this contract beyond just the BRT platforms, but also any area where we have significant passengers on local service that are doing transfers where we are able to. There's a lot of places that we are not able to do snow clearing that is covered by the city and the counties, but where we are able to provide a little bit more clearing for the safety of our operators and our passengers, we are going to advance that. That is the intention, and you will see the contract, so you will approve it or not when that contract comes to you.
Thank you. All right, now we have three, thanks very much, Tanya, for that, and for monitoring that so well. We now go to the federal stimulus funding spend plan, Julie.
Thank you. I'm sharing my screen now. You should be able to see the action item that begins on page 81 and ends on page 83 of your board packet. Last month, we did come and talk about the federal relief money that is coming to GRTC under the COVID pandemic. There are 3 rounds of federal relief that we presented or discussed with the board last month, and the board did provide approval to use a portion of that money for the vaccine van program, but also had a direction that staff and the CEO come back to provide a more detailed plan about the use and budgeting of the relief funds. This is going to be an iterative process to identify the spend plan for that money, and this is the first attempt of a discussion of our priorities and a request for a approval of key items that are needs now, with a discussion about additional analysis needed before we commit that funding for future uses in the coming months. So you'll notice some color coding in this. The color coding is that if it's under if it's an item that's in black, just standard, black and white text, those are items that were previously budgeted and allocated by the board in our adopted budgets or amended budgets in FY20 and the adopted budget in FY21. Those were items that we specifically needed to cover shifts in the local allocations under the maintenance of effort for the CBTA to allow for us to maintain our service, to allow for 0 fares, to allow for unrealized state revenue. We did expect an increase in state revenues under the Omnibus Bill of 1414 last year. When COVID hit, they had to readjust, so there was unrealized revenue from the budget. That has since been modified, but that was an original use of it. We knew that there was going to be some decreased advertising as the economy slowed down and people weren't renewing their advertising. But most importantly, about $4 million went into the paratransit service that we expected to actually have a much higher utilization than it actually has. Some of your questions before about where we're running favorable to budget, Danny, I think you see and hear that we are definitely running favorable to budget on what we expected to use CARES Act money for the paratransit service, and we're using that differential for the vaccine van program. But we're also used quite a bit of money for the COVID operational support, for sick leave, for PPEs, for sanitation, for disinfectants, and there was also the approval in FY20 of money for an employee appreciation bonus for hours worked at the beginning of the pandemic. At that time, when you approved the FY 2021 budget, there was the consideration for the use of the remaining CARES Act money throughout the year. But with so many unknowns, the board decided to put that money into a reserve for consideration closer to the end of the year or for unexpected unknowns during the course of it. Part of that was used for the VCU contract subsidy where they had a reduction of their operations and their educational revenues. We discussed with them a modification of their contract to acknowledge that they were also impacted economically, and we used some of the reserve to modify that contract and to cover that decrease in revenue. We also discussed a possible essential employee appreciation pay throughout the course of the year of up to $2 million. And that was originally calculated on a generic concept of approximately 500 employees. We have, if you consider First Transit, we have more than that, with a standard work year of 80 hours a year. $1 an hour, when you calculate that through, equals about $1 million. So as a reserve of a $2 an hour potential bonus, based on that, would reserve $2 million for an employee appreciation pay. We have not needed to use that funding for immediate needs in FY 2021. We have seen an essential or a critical shortage of our employees as they have been impacted by COVID, to their families being quarantined, themselves being quarantined, the additional burden placed on them to enforce mask rules, to enforce all the different activities that they've had to face in the field through COVID. So what you'll see is the first item in the italics blue is one of those items, and the additional ones in italics blue are those items that I'm requesting for immediate review and consideration and approval this month. I'm going to keep moving on just the blue items and then come back to the green. So the next blue item, which is the italics that I'm asking for consideration and possible approval by the board this month, is the FY 2022 employee recruitment program, and using the second round of federal relief dollars to promote this. You heard multiple times through the board meeting that we are in a pretty serious situation where we're having trouble recruiting new employees. Prior to COVID, we were moving forward very quickly to have a full complement of operators and mechanics, particularly operators. We were having bumper classes coming in through the recruitment program, and that we expect to be not only fully staffed, but also be moving towards possible expansion under CVTA through the success of the recruitment program. And then COVID hit. Under COVID, a lot of people have left the workforce temporarily. They're being supported through other federal programs and state programs in unemployment, and have been reluctant or unable to come back out and get jobs or apply for jobs. We are looking at incentive programs similar to programs that are being discussed at HRT, Hampton Roads Transit, and across the country, to help people overcome the hurdles of coming back to the workforce. And those, we haven't fully defined those, but we are looking at additional marketing and the cost of potentially as much as $500,000, plus sign-on bonuses of potentially a couple $1,000, similar to what they're doing at HRT, and similar programs to look at recruitment from non-traditional sources to recruit and retain employees, so that we can fill the deficit of 30 operators, as well as the need for an additional 30 in the next several years to expand our program. In the next highlighted blue item is a consideration of the use of the American Resource Plan dollars that we just were allocated approximately a month ago in the amount of about $27 million. We're still working with Petersburg on the split of that, so that might change somewhat, but for now that split is $27 million. As you heard from public comment, and as we have discussed through all of the pandemic, that zero fares has been a significantly appreciated program and effective program in keeping our operators safe, allowing rear door boarding, allowing our essential workforce to have been hit hardest by the economic impacts and the health impacts of COVID to continue to access jobs and health and food. The pandemic is still ongoing. We are seeing new variants come across the country, and the rollout of the vaccine is being slow. We also do not know whether or not the vaccine will be effective for more than 6 months at this point. So there are so many unknowns left with COVID and the health-related impacts and the economic-related impacts of COVID that staff is making a recommendation that we stay zero fare budget-wise through FY22 in the amount of $5.6 million. The total expected revenues in our budget previously that we presented to was about $6.8 million. We would reduce the expenses associated with collecting fares for FY22, which would leave us with a need of 5.6 to continue zero fares. It would also leave us the opportunity to continue on with conversations at the state, federal, and local level about a potential future pilot to continue after COVID. I'll leave that for more discussion in a minute. The last item of the highlighted blue, the italics blue, is the CVTA maintenance of service transition support in the amount of $3.9 million that I'm asking for approval to budget for FY22. When we talked also throughout the course of this entire report, we talked about the need of the CVTA dollars funding to support our service in FY22. When we, and I've shown these presentations in the past, but when we went from our budget in FY21 to our COVID budget in FY21, there was approximately a $4 million need, as I showed above, to cover COVID expenses. As we're moving from our FY21 to our FY22, we have another approximately 5% natural increase in service because of the costs of staffing, insurance, healthcare, liability premiums, and that creates a total budget need next year of approximately $6.3 million. The plan that we have been discussing with our partners over the past month is to use the FY21 CVTA dollars that we are currently collecting and reserving, and to use this 3.9 of federal money to cover the balance of maintenance of service in FY22 that we would need for a balanced budget and maintaining existing service. That would allow us to also continue to go through the priority process that Adrian had talked about how we use the money for expansion and how we use the money for ongoing maintenance of service, and also how we account for the unknowns and the economic variables, the unknowns for how the money is coming in and the level of that money that will continue to come in year after year. Talk to some of the other financial directors in Richmond and other areas, and they believe this is a fiscally sound, financially sound path to using FY21 CVTA dollars to kind of use prior year dollars for current year service. And this $3.9 million from the American Rescue Plan would allow us to effectively transition into that model of funding with CVTA.
So Julie, that what you're specifically saying is that in order to fund maintenance of effort, I mean, our current operation in FY 2022 with the FY 2021 dollars from CVTA, we are short about that amount of money. Is that correct?
Approximately, yes.
Okay.
And I'm using round numbers here, so which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, is that while I'm asking for approval of these amounts of the money, I would certainly come back, and John would come back with more detailed scope and analysis as we implement these. So this is giving us direction to use this money this way, but it would not be the last time you heard from us on the use of this money. You would still have opportunities to say, yes, this is the right direction, and the scope and the rollout of it. The green items are items that I also have been discussing with staff and with the region about needs of the system. However, they don't have detailed scopes or budgets at this time. They need further vetting. Because we want to be able to show how we would use the money, I put these in there as a discussion point, but I'm not asking for approval on these at this time. I'm asking for preservation or reservation of these dollars potentially for these items and for further discussion at further board meetings. So that would include the latrines that we're using, the porta potties that we're using. We have had some requests from some of our operators to put more of those out. There are times, especially at our transfer centers, where we have multiple operators coming in for short periods at the same time, that there's a need for more of that. We also are looking at having midday fleet cleaning and additional supplies of PPEs. So we're looking at how we would use the remainder of the CARES Act money to support those needs. We're also looking at, as we expand our services under the CBTA dollars, and we look to how to expand in more frequency, more mobility pilots, we do know that that expansion of service and coverage is going to require additional vehicles. The space that we have here is extremely limited for parking the vehicles, for fueling the vehicles, and for maintaining them, as well as for the additional space we would need for operators to park. We have the facility next to us that is in the process of being reviewed for potential demolition and redevelopment. So we're looking to preserve money in this to be able to allow for that expansion. And we do know that expansion is so critical for the health and the safety of our of COVID. One of the critical failings, I hate to call it that, but of GRTC, and through no fault of our own, is the fact that we have so few vehicles and so few operators. And I'm saying that wrong. I apologize for that. But when COVID hit, we could have easily used a lot more vehicles and a lot more operators to have the social distancing on our buses that we just couldn't accommodate because we didn't have it. So, you know, knowing that we need these for CBTA, we also need to start looking at how we can accommodate a larger fleet and operator size to account for pandemics, account for these needs, account for social distancing, and also to ease our way into the expansion program. There's just too many unknowns at this point, though, for me to ask you to adopt this item now. It's one that I'd like to consider as a placeholder. The other three items under the American Recovery or Rescue Plan Act also are along the same lines of a possible zero fare pilot. There's been discussions about a grant from the state, DRPT, that could be used to pilot zero fares post-COVID. It's very hard to pilot zero fares during COVID because we don't know how people are actually traveling in a non-COVID related or non-pandemic environment. A reservation of this money would allow us to make a compelling grant application for those dollars, but we also need to make sure that we have the local partnerships and commitment from the community to be able to advance this. So until we get those commitments and we have that grant comes out, this also is being preserved. As we know, we have to expand our employment program, and I would like to put out some very effective measures, I believe will be effective measures for FY 2022. As we move into FY 23 and FY 24, I believe it'll be very likely that we'll need to continue those programs to expand our the size of our operators, our mechanics, for the expanded CBTA program. We are looking into having discussions with different vendors about how to put additional ventilations, disinfecting filters in our buses. Technology is advancing every day on that. I was just talking to some vendors yesterday about it, as well as some other applications in our building to how to advance higher technology fleet and facility cleaning long term. Until we have details on that, again, that's an item that I want to hold but not advance just yet until I have more details. The health plan, we've discussed this since prior to COVID, but moving into COVID is more important than ever that we support our staff to actively manage their own health, and that we provide a multiple plan for them to be able to take care of their health without having to go to the emergency room, without having to go to urgent care, but they have an incentive to use a different health plan than the plan we have now. So the FY22 health plan support, I know that John is working with Marsh McClellan as well as Angie and with Tanya and our staff to look at healthcare options we could roll out next year and how we would roll it out. And these dollars would likely help that transition for our staff. And then, of course, the fleet and passenger communication technology. We have several projects that we're looking to advance next year. We have grants with the state for this. However, I've received some preliminary indication that the state capital dollars might be limited in FY22 to state of good repair. And I don't know that yet, but in preparation for that, these communication technologies are really essential to moving forward in COVID and beyond for the communications with our staff as well as the communications with our passengers. So I would also recommend that we can consider the American Rescue Plan money to cover that item should the state not be able to cover it, which I believe is a pretty high likelihood. And finally, I know this is a long discussion, but there's so much detail here and it's so squishy, my technical term. There's also been the discussion you saw in priority 2 that Adrian presented under the plan for the CVTA dollars was the discussion of using $200,000 for to study regional mobility pilots. But that's just to kind of give us an idea about where we might want to put these pilots, how they might be implemented, how we might prioritize them, but not money to necessarily put them out. This would give us money to put out pilots for the regional connectivity in non-traditional bus transit areas to connect the region to the system and to see where we might be effective and how we might be effective moving forward. There has been already some requests for how we might use this money and to start those pilots and how they might inform our future CVTA uses of dollars. So that was a long explanation to get to the request for the recommendation, which the recommendation is written kind of like a resolution where it recognizes, the GRTC Board of Directors recognizes that we do have significant unfunded needs due to the COVID pandemic, and that we do need to accelerate the expansion of our system for the essential workforce because of the healthcare. We also need to expand our system under CVTA, but we know that there are still so many economic variables that we're facing. And with all of those unknowns, that we are only bringing forward a limited recommendation for use of the federal relief dollars at this board meeting to include the FY 2021 Essential Employee Appreciation Pay in the amount of $2.5 million, not to exceed. And that would be based on an incentive program for how many hours they work during the year, and possibly also used for a vaccine incentive program to help people get time off and time to recover from getting the vaccine, so we can increase that rate from that 30% vaccinated to a more reasonable goal of 80%. Also, the FY22 employee recruitment program to be able to use more aggressive campaigns and incentives to hire and retain operations mechanics. To include the FY22 COVID-related zero fares, which would be an addition of $5.6 million, but also a reduction of expenses in next year's budget to balance that out. And finally, the use of approximately $3.9 million for maintenance of service to complement the FY21 CVTA dollars for the maintenance of service in FY22, and that you further direct the prioritization or the consideration of the prioritization of additional programs as mentioned above, that the staff would come back for a further approval and definition when we have scope, schedule, and budget. And I'm going to take a breath now.
Yeah, thank you, Julie, for that, and thank you for taking the time to help each of us understand that over the last several weeks. And so what I guess I'd like would be a motion to approve these things in blue, and then we'll discuss the others after that. How about a motion to approve the blue items?
Can we give the blue items a name? What would we call those?
Blue items.
All right. Well, I think we'll just approve a collection of how many? Four expenditures immediately from the CARES Act and federal monies. The Essential Employee Appreciation Pay estimated at 2.5, Employment Recruitment Program, zero fare for through FY 2022, and the 3.9 million addition to the CVTA funds so that we can fully fund our current service in FY 22.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion of those? All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Thank you very much. Now, with regard to the other items, which are simply a report in process at this point in time, I don't believe any action is necessary. There is time for discussion or comment if anyone wishes to do that. All right, if you have things you want to help Julie on as she moves forward on this, and I know she'll tell us as these things change so that we can approve them when necessary, but please tell her because she's, as you know, really doing detailed work to make sure we get this straight. Is there any further comment on this item?
On the very last through item, the 3,000,009.
Yeah, which we did just approve.
I'm just asking just for clarification where you refer to CVTA funding. Was that in addition to the funding, or is it part of the funding, or I'm not sure I understand.
My apologies. Yes, sir, sorry. This is specifically use of federal relief dollars, and it is what you're authorizing is that we would use these dollars in our FY 22 budget.
Right.
It does not at this point authorize or approve the FY 22 budget, but what you're authorizing is the use of this money in the FY 22 budget. And when we come back next month and we show you the FY 22 budget in more detail, this will be included in that. So you'll have another crack at it.
So my understanding, Julie, and let's check me out on this, and if this is right, Danny and I'll both be straight on it. My understanding is that we are tentatively going to be establishing a 12-month delay in the expenditure of CVTA funds so that the FY 2021 money is used for the FY 2022 expenditures, and the expenditures about which we're speaking are the expenditures necessary to maintain our current level of service.
All right, that answers my question.
And that the CVTA funds from 2021 are not sufficient because of the COVID and all that to carry that.
I understand.
Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're cool. Okay, further questions, conversation?
One quick question from me, just to clarify too, with the zero fare pilot in 2023, we're showing that as about half of what the zero fare we've budgeted in 2022, and that's because we hope to make up that gap with the state funding.
Yes, correct. That if we did not get the funding from the state, if we are unsuccessful in getting that grant, or if we're unsuccessful in getting other partners that would also come on board to support a zero fare pilot moving forward, correct. I would not expect the federal relief dollars to support zero fare pilot for the next several years once we get past COVID, if there's no commitment from the state or the local partners to advance it either.
Okay, and we haven't approved that yet, but that's just tentative, right? Okay. Further questions, comments? All right, thank you very much. I think we've approved the part we can approve, and we're awaiting further developments. And now we have an MOA, which has already been done by other people, and we have to approve it. John?
Yes. Basically, what we have here, starting on slide 84, is the kind of the high-level overview of the GRTC CVTA memo of agreement. Basically, as you all know, is that the CVTA was established by the 2020 General Assembly of Virginia, comprises the jurisdictions in the Planning District 15, and it basically is dealing with the revenue sources are going to be from an additional regional 0.7% for sales and use tax, which revenue, the collection began in October 2020, and then wholesale gas tax of 7.6 cents per gasoline and 7.7 cents per gallon for diesel, which began in 2020. And going forward, they'd be indexed for inflation. So this money is being collected by the state, and then it's being allocated down to BDOT, 1 month lag, and then it gets distributed from BDOT to CVTA, and then from CVTA to the GRTC. So what the memo of agreement basically outlines, the distribution and use of the 15% funds that are under the Chapter 1235 of the 2020 Virginia Acts of Assembly. So detailed in here, the MOA basically has different sections. It talks about the CVTA management of funds, which are basically at the bottom of page 2 of the MOA, which is on slide 87, and then it goes into it talks about the CVTA's administrative expenses, which are also are on the starting on the page 88, and then going further into page 88, it outlines the requirements for GRTC to create and administer a separate special fund, which we have done, and it outlines that the CVTA will distribute the funds to the GRTC on a monthly basis. Any other distributions to GRTC from the non-15% funds, that would be the regional development funds for the 35%, would be made on a project basis and are made on a reimbursement basis. And it also caveats in there that GRTC must use the 15% funds for operating or capital needs as defined by the GRTC's Regional Public Transportation Plan that will be approved by CVTA. Moving forward onto slide 89, it outlines the GRTC's quarterly reporting and annual certifications. GRTC is required to file a quarterly report each November 15th, February 15th, May 15th, and August 15th of each year, as well as submit an annual certification on or before December 1st of each year. Once CVTA receives these reports from the GRTC, CVTA has a 90-day period to review and adopt a resolution stating that they are accepting the reports and acknowledging appropriate fund utilization in here. Also, this on slide 89 or page 4 of the agreement, it outlines the penalties for non-conforming to the reporting schedule and provides for a dispute resolution, which is basically a non-binding mediation prior to any litigation. The MOA was basically worked on with CVTA staff, GRT staff, as well as legal counsel from the city of Richmond. Bonnie Ashley reviewed this as well. So there's a legal perspective in here looking from the GRTC's perspective at it, as well as CVTA had their legal perspective. Also on page slide 89 or page 4 of the agreement, it talks about the Regional Public Transportation Plan, outlining that GRTC is to cooperate and fully and submit in a timely manner for consideration by the CVTA board prior to the end of the fiscal year. And Adrian has briefed the board on that today about our progress on that. Moving over to slide 90, which is page 5 of the agreement. Basically, this goes through the whole procedure as to what happens and outlines the procedures. What happens if either party fails to comply with the MOA, which there could be potential restitution, and also discusses about the maintenance of records by both parties. And then moving over to slide 91, at the bottom of slide 90 and the top of 91, it basically is the notices and the contacts, and then starts with the various legal language. About the entire agreement is the entire agreement. There's no third-party beneficiaries. Talks about the governing law, the interpretation, construction, and the severability clauses. And the final page, slide 92, it talks about if there are going to be amendments, the amendments have to be agreed upon and signed and executed by both parties. And then this is your signature. So pretty much it's a high-level overview on that. I think if at this time if there are any questions, we can field those.
John and Adrian and Julie, I know all three of you, and Bonnie, I know all of you have been working on this thing. Are there any things that you feel like we need to be worried about in this, or are we pretty straight? I note we're required to get a transportation plan in timely manner, but there is no necessary requirement that the CVTA approve it in timely manner. Am I correct on that?
We were very clear to not, let me start over. There was discussion about putting timelines in that, about having us put it in so that they could approve it prior to the fiscal year. Because we are having so many conversations and there's so many details associated with getting everyone lined up on the priorities, we didn't feel it was prudent to put a timeline in this at this time. That if we got to a point where we were coming up close to a fiscal year and we didn't have a plan that was ready for us to submit, or that they were ready to approve, the GRTC direction, I would ask the board for direction to submit a continuing resolution to CVTA to continue to support the funding for maintenance of service while the rest of the plan is discussed.
Okay. But other than that, are you guys, we're fine? Yes?
This is
Bonnie, John, Julie?
It is intended that when this was written, that it would be the template by which all CVTA funds would be distributed and held accountable, more or less, with all the jurisdictions. So this is consistent with what is intended to have all the jurisdictions sign with CVTA.
Okay. Any questions? Could I have a motion to approve this?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the Board of GRTC approve the MOA between GRTC and the CVTA as submitted. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? It is passed.
One abstention,
Oh,
Mr. Chair.
George, you want to tell us about that?
I've breezed through it. I haven't really poured through it. It just, to be very honest, just feels this whole thing just feels a little bit like colonialism to me. You know, you're sort of in a place and you're doing something for a while, then all of a sudden someone comes over that's, that's new and is, and sort of puts itself in a position to sort of dictate some things. I think it's what we have to do, and there's a big plus in it for us. But I am still just getting used to it with a lot of new players, coming in and essentially, I wouldn't say dictating, but really having a lot to say to an organization that has been doing something well for a very, very long time. So yes, this is something I know is necessary. I know we need to move forward as a great benefit for GRTC in the future, but I think I'll be just, abstaining from voting on some of these CVTA things until I feel that the tone is right, as we move forward. So this is no knock at all at the great work that the staff has done in banging this thing out, or recognizing the leverage, that we're experiencing in this. This is just me personally taking a, very, to me, a pro GRTC position in terms of, it needs to be recognized that we, as in the transit company, are the experts in this field, and and that just needs to continue to be recognized. So that's all. That's all.
Well, I'm certainly glad I asked, is what I want to say. Thank you, George.
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond. I just wanted to confirm with George, or to maybe validate with George, that I think that there are, Mr. Braxton, that there are a lot of people on our board, as well as the CVTA board, as well as the jurisdictions, who are working very collaboratively to move this forward. I think there's so many unknowns that people are trying to move very cautiously and respectfully forward, and it has its moments where I think there are moments of brilliance about what the potentials are. But I think that having caution and moving cautiously is warranted, and I appreciate Mr. Braxton's position.
And George, I appreciate the being apprehensive about it as well.
Yeah. You know, what is actually true here, and it is just really painful, and it has all of the pain in it, is this is really the first significant collective operation carried out by the 9 jurisdictions of metropolitan Richmond in a semi-governmental capacity together. I mean, the convention center was a project, but this is actually spending tax funds together, and it has all of the collective potential, but all of the long, centuries-old accumulated mistrust involved in it. And I mean, I've been watching all the meetings. Thank you, Zoom, and it's pretty excruciating. So, George, your feelings echo that of a lot of folks, but we also know this is a very important step forward, and we just have to keep plugging at it.
I recognize it and support it. I know. Just feel like it just needs to be on record some way.
Thank you. Other comments? All right, thank you very much for that. Now we're going to find out about how many different boards we actually are here. I think, I don't know what this is, but go for it, John. What are you doing here?
Okay, thank you. This is a resolution that will look very similar to something that we brought during the month of March or February, I believe. And basically, we brought it under the GRTC board. But you know, I have been working, as well as Julie and other members of management, have been working with Employee Benefit Council to review the Old Dominion Transit Management Company Employee Retirement Plan and Trust, which is known as the 401A plan, as well as the Old Dominion Transit Management Company Employee Deferred Comp Plan, which is known as the 457B Deferral Plan, to ensure compliance with the applicable law and ensure continued qualification of both plans and the exemption of the applicable trusts under the sections of 401A and 501A of the Internal Revenue Code. Basically, this resolution is being brought back because through our diligence and working with Bonnie Ashley in the city of Richmond, as well as of our own benefit counsel attorney, we found that the plan sponsor is in fact the Old Dominion Transit Management Company subsidiary. So the resolution has to be adopted through their board, which is basically the concurrent board of GRTC as well as rideshares. So basically, the resolution is asking permission or authorizing the GRTC Chief Executive Officer, Julie Tim, or myself to make such amendments and take appropriate action necessary to maintain the qualification of the plans and the exemption of the applicable trusts under the 401A and 501A sections of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. So as a bring back to the board, we're seeking under the right request of the board authorization to proceed forward.
Questions or comments on this wonderfully obscure recommendation?
Been on the board as long as I have. I understand the Old Dominion man. I should say I don't quite, but I do understand the need to keep Old Dominion Transit Management Company something to do.
So, Danny, do you want us to vote for this?
I vote yay.
Could I have a motion to approve this resolution? This is a resolution to authorize you guys to
to execute and take whatever steps are necessary to maintain compliance and execute the plan documents so that we're being in compliance with the IRS Code 1986 for 401A and 501A sections.
Okay, what he said. Anybody want to move that?
I'll second Danny's motion.
Okay.
Thank
Any
you.
further conversation?
Gary.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, it is passed.
And the mystery continues.
Okay, Chief Executive Officer's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This has been a long, productive but long meeting. I'll try and keep this short as best as I'm able. Most of what I had in my report we've already talked about. We continue to have COVID tests. Employees test positive for COVID while the rate has dropped dramatically. COVID is still out there, and we still need to maintain all of our quarantining and contact tracing and still work to get our vaccinations up. We are reporting, as we said, about 30% of our staff with the vaccination. We did start providing under the Family First Coronavirus Recovery Act, I think I got that wrong, allows for pay of sick leave and reimbursement of that through tax credits. We've been using that for the past year. Some of that was made optional. All of it was made optional for this calendar year. And it was also renewed on April 1st and allowed for additional use of sick leave benefits for people to go out and get their vaccine. We did hear from some of our staff that they were concerned that if they got the vaccine, they'd be sick and they didn't have the sick leave to take off the next day. We are taking care of that for them. We'd rather take care of them for one day for a vaccine rather than for 3 weeks of them recovering. I think that is a wise and useful use of that law and our relief dollars. As I mentioned before, there is the budget, the delay in the FY 2022 budget. We had discussed with you that we would bring the draft to you this month for further discussion based on all the issues we discussed today that are budgetary in nature. We are delaying that so that we can adopt these measures or amend the budget to include these measures, and we will bring that to you in May for discussion. I am having ongoing discussions with all the county and city administrators and board members and designees for the CVTA. At the last CVTA board meeting, there was a significant number of the members who expressed a desire to have more engagement on the transportation plan and a higher level of discussion about how transit could support their specific jurisdictions. I committed to reach out to them. I have done so, and we are now setting up meetings to have those conversations about what transit means to the region and the priorities of each jurisdiction and how GRTC can or should not be part of that local and regional planning. Again, I was moving on, and I wanted to just say that I continue to be proud to serve GRTC. I know that 2020 was hard, and we hope that 2021 would be easier, and it is continuing to be a challenge, but the team is amazing. They continue to present and improve on our service and look for opportunities to make it better for our staff and for our riders. I hope that you see that reflected in these board meetings. As long as they are, I hope that you see an improvement in value of their reports to you. If there's anything that I can do or they can do to provide even more value in our reporting and in our processes, we're open to any suggestions in this ongoing process. And that, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, is, if there are no questions, concludes the CEO's report for April.
Well, thank you very much. So that this is my report. There's an article in the paper this morning about Henrico's desire to be a part of the GRTC board. I am sure that process will go through with the CVTA's, report. That sooner or later that will be resolved. I was quoted as saying that the city of Richmond would approve it. I don't have any idea what the city of Richmond will do at this point in time. I do believe it's quite likely and healthy that Henrico will put itself in a management position here as well. What I did say to the reporter, and again was not quoted as saying it, is that in my time on the board, I've actually come to adopt a lot of Braxton's theology, philosophy, which is that this board's job is to assist in the effective management of a very good company, and that there's plenty of opportunity for statement of proper demand, politics, and money contributions by the jurisdictions and now by the CVTA, to make sure that proper political and community demands and needs are expressed. But it is very important that there be citizen people who carefully assist and monitor the staff and management of GRTC. And that's what this board does. And in my time here, I feel has done a very good job, facilitated by Ms. Tim and staff, a really incredible improvement and strengthening of the ability of empowering us to know what's going on. I just feel like you've really been working at that solidly. The meetings sometimes are long, but the meetings are also, we are well informed, and you do good work in getting reports to us and in helping this group of people help be your support to have a healthy and excellently functioning operation. So thank you very much for that. I think we sense the value of our task and pray that whatever happens as this operation moves forward, that the strength of operation and of good, healthy board management can continue. So with that, I think we have a resolution that Gary and I have put together and all of you have seen. So Gary, would you present that?
I sure will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This concerns GRTC CEO compensation and contract extension. This is a motion that I am making. Again, thank you all for your input on this topic, and I'm sorry I didn't get this ready for the board packet, so I'll go ahead and read the motion for the benefit of everyone who has not seen it yet. In negotiating Julie Tim's employment contract in 2019, we determined a base salary and benefits package based on Ms. Tim's experience to date and the GRTC's board need to witness Ms. Tim's competency as a first-time CEO before considering a salary level and benefit more commensurate for a proven CEO for a transit agency of GRTC size and scope. Given that Ms. Tim has met and greatly exceeded certain expectations in her role as CEO of GRTC in a very difficult and trying first 12 months and since, I recommend the following alterations to Ms. Tim's salary and employment contract terms. Number one, to increase her base salary 10% to $228,800, effective as of her first year anniversary date of September 23rd, 2020. There will be a one-time payment reflecting the retroactive pay due Ms. Tim for the time period between her anniversary date and the date that her new salary level becomes effective on the GRTC payroll system. The calculation of this one-time retroactive pay amount will deduct the effect of the 3% merit increase Ms. Tim earned at her anniversary date. The salary increase in payment of retroactive pay should occur on the next payroll date following the date of board approval. Number two, the amount of severance paid to Ms. Tim if Ms. Tim's position as CEO is terminated without cause as described in her employment contract will increase to an amount equal to 12 months of salary based on her salary level at the time of termination. Number 2 and 3 are both contract adjustments. Number 3, the term of Ms. Tim's employment contract will be extended 2 years from September 22nd, 2022 to September 22nd, 2024, including all existing terms and as amended above in this motion. I hereby move that GRTC Board approve the aforementioned terms to Ms. Tim's salary and contract terms.
Is there a second, please?
Second.
All right, you've heard the motion and it's been seconded. And I know we've discussed this with each other before. Is there further conversation or discussion of this? All right, I think we are all just very grateful for Ms. Tim's service and for the really sterling leadership that she has exhibited in what has been a very challenging beginning to a term as what I hope will be a long term as the CEO of GRTC. If there's no further conversation, I'd like to ask for a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. That is all I have for my report. Is there any other business?
I would just like to go on the record. Oh, I would just like to go on the record to something we discussed earlier, that I welcome participation from appointed Henrico board members who will come on to serve in a fiduciary capacity for GRTC.
Thank you.
I am very open to.
Me too. Any other comments? Julie, do you want to say something else?
I did feel like I wanted to express my appreciation to the board for the contract amendment. Thank you for your expression of confidence in me, and for your expression of confidence in GRTC and what we have done together over the past year. It's been truly a joy to be here. I have significantly more gray hairs than I did when I started, and I'm proud of every single one. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think
the only thing that's left is alien attack, and it's in the first year. You've seen just about you've seen things that we could not have imagined happening. So, like I said, we can just stay away from alien attack or World War centered in Richmond, Virginia. We'll be okay.
Just be careful.
I've come to the conclusion, I've talked with staff, is that there's certain things we just don't speak. We just don't even say it.
Yeah. Well, and I think I really should say, and we should all say, that no leadership works without a team, and it is really an incredible team that is assembled here at GRTC, both at the management level and at the operational level. And that's really clear. And so what we've got is a bunch of folks really working together in difficult time to produce a first-class operation, and we're all very grateful.
I echo what you're saying. I think that the thing is that while Julie has done an extremely effective and good job, she has developed a team that supports her and knows how to address the issues and the things that need to be done.
Right.
And I'm way beyond my standard amount of speaking in a meeting, but I'm going to put on my professional hat as well and just applaud Julie for the mentoring and empowering women within this organization. It's not lost on anyone when we see these presentations, these very detailed and extremely professional presentation, the number of women that are participating in them and doing excellent work for this organization. I think it is. I think it's great. GRTC has been recognized for it, and this is the march to the future. This is a place GRTC should be perceived as an employer of choice, and that's something else that should not be lost on anyone who's following what this company.
Okay, boys and girls, and Bonnie Ashley, thank you for your work too. I've really watched what you've been doing these last couple of months, and it's incredible. So the meeting is now adjourned. Have a good day.